The moment Captain Laura Bennett pointed at Ryan Cole and declared him unfit to fly, she thought she held all the power. Standing in front of the entire ground crew with her 4 gold stripes gleaming, she demanded his immediate removal from her cockpit. The quiet single father didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply nodded and stepped back into the freezing pre-dawn darkness, his silence more unnerving than any protest. What Laura didn't know, what would soon shatter her world, was that the man she just humiliated wasn't just a co-pilot. He owned the very aircraft she refused to let him fly. If you're ready to discover how one woman's arrogance led to her most devastating lesson, stay with me until the end. And don't forget to hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. The pre-dawn cold cut through the tarmac like broken glass, sharp and unforgiving. Denver International Airport sprawled beneath a sky still bruised with night, the first hints of dawn barely touching the eastern horizon. In the vast expanse of concrete and steel, a single Boeing 737 sat waiting, its engines silent, its fuselage gleaming under the harsh floodlights that turned shadows into accusations. Captain Laura Bennett stood beside the aircraft's stairs, her uniform immaculate despite the early hour. 4 gold stripes circled her sleeves, proof of rank, symbols of authority she'd fought 20 years to earn. Her blonde hair was pulled back severely, not a strand out of place, her posture military straight. At 46, she carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from logging over 15,000 flight hours, from commanding respect in a field still dominated by men who questioned whether women belonged in the cockpit at all. She'd proven them wrong, every single one of them. And she wasn't about to let anyone, least of all, some nobody co-pilot she'd never heard of, undermine that hard-won respect. You cannot be serious, and her voice carried across the tarmac, cold and precise as the morning air. This is who they assigned me? Ryan Cole stood 10 feet away, his flight bag slung over one shoulder, his expression carefully neutral. He was younger than Laura by perhaps a decade, with dark hair beginning to gray at the temples and eyes that held a quiet watchfulness. His uniform was pressed but not pristine, functional rather than showy. There was something understated about him, a quality Laura immediately interpreted as weakness. Chief Flight Operations Officer Marcus Webb stood between them, his tablet glowing in the darkness, his expression caught somewhere between exhaustion and exasperation. At 52, Marcus had seen every kind of pilot drama imaginable, but this morning's conflict was starting earlier than usual. Captain Bennett, First Officer Cole has all the necessary qualifications. I don't care about qualifications on paper. Laura cut him off, her tone sharp enough to draw blood. I care about competence in the air. I asked for Sarah Martinez. I specifically requested an experienced first officer for this route, and instead you give me... She gestured dismissively toward Ryan. Him. Ryan didn't react. His hands remained loose at his sides, his breathing even. He'd been through worse than a captain's disdain. Much worse. First Officer Martinez called in sick at 0300, Marcus explained, his patience wearing thin. Ryan is fully qualified to fly this route. He's logged over 8,000 hours, holds type ratings on... I don't know him. Laura's interruption was absolute. I've never flown with him. I've never even seen his name on the roster before today. For all I know, he got his license from a correspondence course. The insult hung in the cold air, ugly and deliberate. Several ground crew members had stopped their work to watch the confrontation unfold, their faces carefully blank but their attention razor sharp. Airport drama always drew an audience. Ryan finally spoke, his voice quiet but clear. Captain Bennett, I understand your concerns about crew familiarity. Perhaps we could review my flight records before departure. I don't have time to babysit you through a qualification review. Laura's words came fast and cutting. We have 143 passengers waiting to board, a schedule to maintain, and corporate breathing down our necks about on-time performance. What I need is a competent first officer, not a training exercise. Marcus stepped forward, his voice dropping to a tone that suggested this conversation should move somewhere more private. Captain, can we discuss this in operations? No. Laura's response was immediate and uncompromising. We can discuss it right here. I am the pilot in command of this aircraft. I have the authority and the responsibility to refuse any crew member I deem unsuitable for flight operations. That's not ego, Marcus. That's safety protocol. She turned her full attention to Ryan, her eyes hard as diamonds. I'm sure you're a nice person. I'm sure you try very hard. But this is a complex route with difficult weather patterns and challenging approach vectors. I need someone I can trust implicitly, someone whose capabilities I know without question. I need a partner, not a passenger in the right seat. The words were designed to humiliate, and they landed with precision. Ryan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the only visible sign that Laura's assessment had struck something deeper than professional pride. Captain Bennett, Ryan began again, his tone still controlled. I assure you, your assurances mean nothing to me. Laura spoke over him without hesitation. I don't know you. I don't know your training background, your decision-making patterns, your stress responses. For all I know, you freeze in emergencies. You second-guess commands. You lack the situational awareness necessary for high workload environments. Marcus raised a hand, trying to regain control of the situation. Laura, you're making assumptions without basis. I'm making command decisions based on my experience and judgment. Her response was ice. That's what captains do, Marcus. Or have you forgotten what actual flight operations look like from behind your desk? The attack on Marcus was tactical. Shift the blame, maintain dominance, never concede ground. It was a technique Laura had perfected over 2 decades of fighting for respect in cockpits where men assumed they knew better. Ryan watched her with those quiet, measuring eyes. When he spoke again, his words were careful and deliberate. Captain, I understand crew dynamics are crucial. If you'd like to run through some scenarios, discuss approach procedures, verify my competency through... I don't have time for theatrical demonstrations. Laura's dismissal was absolute. What I have time for is finding a replacement first officer who actually belongs in a professional cockpit. She turned to Marcus, her decision already made. Call scheduling. Get me someone qualified, someone with actual experience, someone I can work with. There is no one else available, Marcus said flatly. Every qualified first officer is either flying on mandatory rest or outside their duty period. Ryan is your option, Laura. Your only option if this flight is going to depart on schedule. Laura's expression hardened into something cold and immovable. Then we delay until someone suitable becomes available. We're not delaying a full flight because you don't like someone's face, Marcus shot back, his own patience finally breaking. That's not how this works, and you know it. It's not about what I like. Laura's voice rose slightly, her control slipping just enough to reveal the anger beneath. It's about safety. It's about standards. It's about maintaining the integrity of flight operations. She pointed directly at Ryan, her hand steady, her intention brutal. Look at him, Marcus. Really look at him. Does he project confidence? Does he command respect? Does he look like someone who could handle an emergency at 35,000 feet? Ryan stood perfectly still, absorbing the assault without visible reaction. His silence was almost eerie. No defense, no counterattack, just a kind of patient endurance that seemed to infuriate Laura further. He's too quiet, she continued, her words gaining momentum. Too passive. A first officer needs to be assertive, needs to speak up, needs to challenge the captain when safety demands it. This man barely makes eye contact. How is he supposed to function under pressure when he can't even defend himself against basic criticism? Maybe he doesn't feel the need to defend himself against unfounded attacks, Marcus suggested, his tone heavy with meaning. Laura ignored him, her focus locked on Ryan with laser intensity. I've spent 20 years building my reputation, 20 years proving that women can command just as effectively as men. Do you have any idea how many people are waiting for me to fail? How many colleagues would love to see me make a mistake they can point to as evidence that female captains are a liability? Her voice carried across the tarmac, loud enough now that the ground crew wasn't even pretending not to listen. I will not risk my career, my license, or the lives of 143 passengers because scheduling couldn't be bothered to find me a competent first officer. I will not compromise my standards, and I will not fly with someone I don't trust. The declaration rang out like a verdict. Final. Absolute. Ryan's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Not anger exactly, more like a deep weariness, the exhaustion of someone who'd heard variations of this speech before. Marcus looked between them, his frustration palpable. Laura, you're being unreasonable. I'm being responsible. She cut across him again. I'm doing exactly what command training teaches, assessing my crew, identifying potential weaknesses, and taking action before those weaknesses become disasters. If that makes me unreasonable in your eyes, I can live with that judgment. She straightened her already perfect posture, her decision rendered. Find me another first officer, Marcus, or find another captain for this flight. Those are your options. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Ground crew members exchanged glances. A flight attendant emerging from the terminal stopped mid-step, sensing the conflict. Ryan shifted his weight slightly, his flight bag sliding further down his shoulder. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet that both Marcus and Laura had to lean forward to hear him clearly. Captain Bennett, may I ask you something? Laura's eyebrows rose in surprise at the question, but she gave a curt nod. Make it quick. Have you reviewed the weather forecast for our route today? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Of course I've reviewed the weather. I review all flight parameters before every departure. Then you're aware of the forecast icing conditions over the Rockies, the potential for clear air turbulence near the jet stream, the crosswinds predicted for our destination? Laura's jaw tightened. I'm aware of all operational factors, yes, which is exactly why I need an experienced first officer, not someone who'll panic at the first sign of turbulence. Ryan nodded slowly, as if confirming something to himself. And you've checked the aircraft maintenance logs, the recent service history, any mechanical notes from the previous flight crew? That's the first officer's responsibility, Laura snapped. Which you would know if you had any actual experience with pre-flight procedures. I completed the walk-around inspection 40 minutes ago, Ryan said quietly, before you arrived. Something in his tone made Marcus look up sharply. And? Ryan hesitated, his gaze moving from Marcus to Laura and back again. I found something during the exterior inspection, something that needs to be logged. Laura's expression shifted from irritation to suspicion. What kind of something? A hydraulic fluid seepage, small amount but visible, right main landing gear area, near the brake assembly. The words fell into the conversation like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread outward in invisible but undeniable patterns. Marcus immediately pulled his tablet closer, his fingers moving across the screen. How much seepage? Not substantial, Ryan admitted. Approximately 10 milliliters on the concrete beneath the assembly, but fresh, still wet when I inspected it. Laura's eyes narrowed. And you're just mentioning this now? After all this drama, after wasting everyone's time with your presence, you suddenly remember you found a potential maintenance issue? I documented it immediately upon discovery, Ryan said, his tone unchanged. I was waiting for the appropriate moment to brief the captain, but we haven't exactly had a professional pre-flight briefing. The gentle rebuke in his words was subtle but unmistakable. Laura's face flushed slightly. Marcus was already pulling up maintenance records, his expression growing more serious. There's nothing logged from the previous crew, no hydraulic system alerts, no brake pressure anomalies. The previous crew landed at 11 p.m. in low light conditions, Ryan offered. They might not have noticed a small leak during their post-flight inspection. Laura crossed her arms, her stance defensive. So you're saying you found something that multiple experienced pilots and professional maintenance crews missed? I'm saying I found hydraulic fluid on the ground during my walk-around inspection, Ryan corrected quietly. What that means is for maintenance to determine. Or, Laura's voice took on a sharp, accusatory edge. You're inventing a problem to make yourself look competent, manufacturing a safety concern to justify your presence on this crew. The accusation was ugly enough to make Marcus inhale sharply. Laura, that's entirely possible, Laura insisted, her conviction absolute. He shows up to a flight where he knows he's not wanted, where the captain has legitimate concerns about his experience. What better way to prove his worth than to discover a convenient mechanical issue that makes him look thorough and safety conscious? Ryan's expression remained carefully neutral, but his voice carried a new edge, subtle but present. Captain Bennett, I have no interest in games. If you want to verify my findings, you're welcome to inspect the landing gear yourself. The seepage is visible to anyone who looks. I'm not crawling around on the tarmac in my uniform to verify your claims, Laura shot back. That's what maintenance crews are for. Marcus was already on his radio, his voice crisp and professional. Ground maintenance, this is ops. Need an immediate inspection on aircraft 737, tail number November 437, Bravo. Possible hydraulic leak, right main landing gear. Priority check, please. The radio crackled. Copy, ops. Maintenance team en route. ETA 3 minutes. Laura rounded on Marcus, her frustration boiling over. You're actually taking his word on this? You're delaying a full flight based on the unverified claims of a first officer we know nothing about? I'm following safety protocols, Marcus replied, his tone brooking no argument. Any crew member reports a potential mechanical issue, we investigate. That's not negotiable, Laura. You know that. What I know, Laura said, her words clipped and precise, is that this smells like manipulation. This smells like someone trying to undermine my authority by creating a situation where he gets to play hero. She turned her full attention back to Ryan, her eyes blazing. You think I don't see what you're doing? You think I haven't dealt with ambitious first officers who try to make their captains look incompetent? This is a classic power play. Find a problem the captain supposedly missed, make yourself look thorough and safety conscious, undermine her command authority. Ryan met her gaze steadily. I'm not trying to undermine anyone, Captain. I'm trying to ensure we don't take off in an aircraft with a hydraulic system malfunction. If there even is a malfunction, Laura shot back. If you're not just wasting everyone's time to prove some kind of point. A white maintenance truck appeared in the distance, its yellow lights flashing as it approached the aircraft. Laura watched it come, her jaw set, her entire posture radiating indignation. 2 maintenance technicians climbed out carrying flashlights and inspection equipment. The senior tech, a woman in her 50s with grease-stained coveralls and shrewd eyes, approached Marcus first. What have we got, Mark? First Officer Cole reports hydraulic seepage, right main gear area. Says he spotted it during his walk-around. The tech's eyes shifted to Ryan. Show me. Ryan led the way around the aircraft's nose, moving with the confident efficiency of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. Laura followed, her skepticism evident in every step. Marcus brought up the rear, his tablet still in hand. They reached the right main landing gear, and Ryan pointed without touching anything. There, beneath the brake assembly, fresh fluid on the concrete, approximately 10 milliliters. I didn't want to contaminate the area, so I only made visual confirmation. The senior technician crouched down, her flashlight beam cutting through the pre-dawn darkness. She studied the concrete for several long seconds, then shifted her attention upward to the landing gear assembly itself. The silence stretched out, taut as a wire. Finally, the tech stood up, brushing dirt from her knees. He's right. Hydraulic fluid, type 5000. Fresh seepage. I can see the wet spot on the brake line housing. Laura's face went pale, then flushed. How much? Hard to say without getting the bird up on jacks, but I can see active weeping from what looks like a fitting. Could be just a loose connection. Could be a compromised seal. The tech's expression was serious. Either way, it's a no-go until we isolate the source and verify system integrity. Marcus's shoulders sagged slightly. How long? Minimum 90 minutes if it's just a loose fitting. Could be 4 to 6 hours if we need to replace seals or lines. Won't know until we get into it. Laura stood frozen, her mind clearly racing through the implications. A 4 to 6 hour delay. A full aircraft of passengers that would need to be rebooked. Corporate executives who would demand explanations. Her perfect on-time record taking a hit. All because of a quiet first officer she'd been trying to remove from her crew. The tech was already calling for additional equipment, her voice professional and matter-of-fact. Her colleague began setting up work lights around the landing gear area. Ryan stepped back, giving the maintenance crew room to work. His expression remained neutral, but Laura caught something in his eyes. Not triumph, not vindication, just a kind of quiet steadiness that somehow made her earlier accusations feel even more shameful. I suppose you think you're very clever, Laura said, her voice low enough that only Ryan could hear. Finding that leak, making me look like I was willing to fly an unsafe aircraft. Ryan turned to face her fully, and for the first time, something like disappointment crossed his features. Captain Bennett, this isn't about clever. This isn't about making you look like anything. This is about a hydraulic leak that could have caused a brake system failure on landing. A small leak? Laura argued, grasping for any ground to stand on. The tech said it might just be a loose fitting. And if it's not? Ryan's voice remained quiet, but there was steel underneath now. If that fitting fails completely at 35,000 feet, if we lose brake pressure on approach, if we touch down with 143 passengers aboard and can't stop the aircraft safely, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Would you like to explain to their families that we knew about a potential hydraulic issue but flew anyway because the captain didn't want to look incompetent? Because she was more concerned with her schedule and her pride than with safety? Laura's mouth opened, then closed. No words came. Ryan held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned away, moving back toward the terminal. I'll be in operations when you need me, Marcus, assuming I'm still assigned to this flight. He walked away without another word, his footsteps echoing on the concrete. Marcus watched him go, then looked at Laura. The disappointment in his expression was worse than any accusation. 20 years, Laura, 20 years I've known you, and I've never seen you treat another pilot like that. Laura's defenses rose immediately. He gave me no reason to trust him. He found a safety issue you would have missed. Marcus cut her off, his voice sharp. He documented it properly. He reported it through appropriate channels. He did everything exactly right, and you accused him of lying and manipulation. I didn't know, Laura began. No, you didn't know. Because you decided he was incompetent before you ever spoke to him, before you reviewed his records, before you gave him any chance at all. Marcus's words were brutal in their honesty. You judged him on sight, Laura, and you were wrong. The simple statement hit harder than any elaborate criticism could have. Laura watched the maintenance crew work, their flashlights creating stark shadows beneath the aircraft. The hydraulic leak was small but undeniable, a dark stain on the concrete that testified to Ryan's accuracy. She'd been so certain, so absolutely convinced that this quiet first officer was inadequate, unsuitable, unsafe, and she'd been completely, demonstrably wrong. Marcus's radio crackled with updates from dispatch, passengers asking questions, corporate demanding explanations. The flight would be delayed indefinitely. The aircraft was grounded pending full inspection and repair. All exactly as Ryan had said it should be. Laura stood alone on the tarmac as the sky began to lighten in the east, the first rays of dawn touching the distant mountains. Ground crew moved around her with purpose, doing their jobs, maintaining the standards that kept the skies safe. And somewhere in the operations building, a first officer she'd humiliated and dismissed was probably filing his report, documenting the leak he'd discovered, the leak she would have missed in her arrogance. The 4 gold stripes on her sleeve caught the growing light, gleaming with the authority she'd wielded so carelessly. But authority, she was beginning to realize, wasn't the same as being right. And respect couldn't be demanded, only earned. The morning cold seemed to cut deeper now, finding its way through her perfect uniform to something she'd thought long-armored, doubt. The operations center hummed with controlled chaos. Fluorescent lights cast everything in stark relief, dispatch screens glowing blue, coffee cups leaving rings on metal desks, flight charts pinned to walls with magnetic strips. Laura pushed through the glass doors, her uniform still pristine despite the pre-dawn confrontation on the tarmac, her expression carved from stone. Ryan sat at a corner workstation, his flight bag at his feet, his fingers moving across a keyboard as he typed his maintenance report. He didn't look up when she entered, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. The deliberate disregard felt like a slap. She wanted to say something, an apology maybe, or an explanation, or at least some acknowledgement that the hydraulic leak had been real and serious. But the words stuck in her throat, tangled up with pride and embarrassment, and the growing realization that she'd made a catastrophic error in judgment. Marcus emerged from his office, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing in frustration at whatever corporate executive was demanding explanations. He saw Laura and motioned her toward the conference room, his expression making clear this wasn't optional. Laura followed him into the small glass-walled space, aware that the entire operations staff could see them even if they couldn't hear the conversation. Marcus closed the door with more force than necessary. Maintenance says minimum 3 hours, he said without preamble, ending his phone call and tossing the device onto the conference table. The fitting was cracked, not just loose. Another few pressure cycles, and it would have failed completely. The words settled over Laura like ash. A cracked fitting. Not a loose connection, not a minor issue. An actual structural failure waiting to happen. 3 hours, she repeated, her voice hollow. 3 hours if we're lucky. Could be 5 if they find additional damage when they get the cowling off. Marcus leaned against the table, his exhaustion evident. Corporate is livid. We've got 143 passengers to rebook, connecting flights to rearrange, hotel accommodations to coordinate. The financial impact alone, I know, Laura cut him off. I understand the implications. Do you? Marcus's question was sharp. Do you understand that if Ryan hadn't caught that leak, if he hadn't insisted on logging it despite your resistance, we could have had a catastrophic brake failure on landing? Do you understand what that would have meant? Laura's hands clenched at her sides. The leak was small. The tech said it was just seepage. A cracked fitting is never just seepage, Laura. You know that. Marcus's voice carried a disappointment that cut deeper than anger. And even if it had been minor, even if it had been nothing at all, Ryan was right to report it. That's the job. That's what we train pilots to do. Identify potential issues and report them, even when it's inconvenient, even when it makes them unpopular. He pushed away from the table, moving to the window that overlooked the terminal. Especially when it makes them unpopular. Laura stood silent, watching Marcus's reflection in the glass. Outside, early morning travelers moved through the concourse, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the operations center. I want him removed from my crew, Laura said finally, the words coming out harder than she'd intended. I want a different first officer assigned when the aircraft is cleared for service. Marcus turned slowly, his expression incredulous. You're serious? Completely serious? Laura forced steel into her voice, trying to reclaim some measure of control. What happened out there proves my point. We have no working relationship. There's no trust, no communication, no crew coordination. He undermined my authority in front of ground staff, created conflict instead of following chain of command. He found a safety issue you missed, Marcus interrupted. He documented it properly. He reported it through correct channels. What exactly did he do wrong? He should have brought it to me privately, Laura insisted. He should have discussed it quietly, pilot to pilot, before escalating to operations. Instead, he went over my head, made me look incompetent in front of the entire ground crew. You made yourself look incompetent, Marcus said bluntly. Ryan did his job. You're the one who turned it into a spectacle. The truth of that statement burned, but Laura pushed back against it. He knew reporting that leak would delay the flight. He knew it would make me look bad for wanting to proceed. This was calculated, Marcus. This was him proving a point. What point would that be? Marcus's voice carried an edge of disbelief. That safety matters more than ego? That following procedures is more important than protecting a captain's pride? That he's somehow superior to me? Laura shot back. That his judgment is better, his standards higher, his dedication to safety more authentic than mine. He set me up to fail, Marcus. He found that leak and waited. Let me dig myself deeper before revealing it. Marcus studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. You really believe that? I know how ambitious first officers operate, Laura said. I've seen them try to make captains look incompetent so they can advance their own careers. I've watched them undermine command authority, second-guess decisions, create conflicts that make flight operations impossible. And you think Ryan is doing that? Marcus's tone suggested she was missing something fundamental. You think a first officer who quietly documents safety issues and reports them through proper channels is playing political games? I think a first officer who shows up out of nowhere, gets publicly rejected by his captain, and then conveniently discovers a mechanical issue is doing more than just his job. Laura's voice rose slightly. I think he's making a statement, and I think putting us together in a cockpit is a disaster waiting to happen. Marcus crossed his arms, his stance shifting into something more confrontational. Laura, do you know anything about Ryan Cole's background? The question caught her off guard. I know he claims 8,000 flight hours. I know scheduling pulled him from somewhere without warning. He didn't come from scheduling, Marcus interrupted. He came from corporate. He was in Denver for a board meeting. Laura's brow furrowed. A board meeting? What board meeting? The quarterly review. The one where ownership discusses fleet operations, safety standards, financial performance? Marcus's words were carefully measured. The one where people who own pieces of this company make decisions about how it runs. Something cold began forming in Laura's stomach. What are you saying? I'm saying you should have reviewed his file before you started making assumptions about his competence. Marcus moved to the conference table, pulling up something on his tablet. Ryan Cole, 12,000 flight hours, not 8. Type ratings on 7 different aircraft. Former Air Force pilot, flew rescue operations in Afghanistan. Civilian career includes 10 years as a check airman, 3 years as a training captain, 2 years in fleet safety management. He turned the tablet toward Laura, showing her a personnel file she should have read before ever stepping onto that tarmac. And, Marcus continued, his voice dropping lower, he's also the co-owner of this aircraft and 15 others in our fleet. He owns 37% of this company, Laura. He's not just a first officer. He's one of the people who signs your paychecks. The words hit Laura like physical blows. She felt the blood drain from her face, felt her carefully constructed worldview tilt and crack. That's not possible, she whispered. Owners don't fly routes. Owners don't sit right seat. Ryan does. Marcus's tone carried no satisfaction in delivering this information, only a kind of weary resignation. He flies 2 shifts a month, always as first officer, always giving command authority to the assigned captain. Says it keeps him connected to actual operations, helps him understand what pilots deal with every day. Laura reached for the conference table, needing something solid to hold on to. Why wasn't I told? Why didn't anyone inform me that I was flying with what? An owner? Marcus's question was pointed. Would that have changed how you treated him? Would you have been more respectful if you'd known he could fire you? The implication stung. Laura wanted to say yes, wanted to claim she would have behaved differently with that knowledge. But the honesty in Marcus's eyes demanded truth. I would have been professional, she said finally. You should be professional with every crew member, regardless of their rank or position. Marcus took his tablet back, his disappointment palpable. That's what professionalism means, Laura. Treating people with respect because it's right, not because they have power over you. Laura sank into one of the conference room chairs, her legs suddenly unsteady. Through the glass walls, she could see Ryan still at his workstation, still typing his report, still appearing completely unaffected by the chaos he'd created. Except he hadn't created chaos. She had. He didn't identify himself, Laura said, grasping for any justification. He didn't tell me who he was. He let me believe. He let you reveal exactly who you are, Marcus interrupted. And now we both have to deal with the consequences. The fluorescent light seemed too bright suddenly, the operations center too small. Laura pressed her fingers against her temples, feeling the beginning of a headache. What happens now? She asked quietly. Marcus settled into the chair across from her, his expression grave. Now Ryan finishes his report. Maintenance completes their inspection and repair. And then you have a decision to make. What decision? Whether to proceed with Ryan as your first officer or request a different assignment entirely. Marcus's words were careful. I can't force you to fly with someone you don't trust, but I also can't have a captain who refuses to work with qualified crew members based on personal prejudice. It's not prejudice, Laura protested. It's professional judgment. Based on what? Marcus challenged. Based on him being too quiet, too passive? Based on assumptions you made in 30 seconds without reviewing his qualifications or speaking to him as an equal? Laura wanted to argue, wanted to defend her initial assessment, but every justification she'd used that morning rang hollow now, exposed as the rationalizations they'd always been. I thought he was incompetent, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked at him and saw someone who didn't belong in a professional cockpit, someone who'd gotten his position through luck or connections rather than skill. Why? Marcus's question was simple but devastating. What about him made you think that? Laura opened her mouth, then closed it. What had made her think that? Ryan's quiet demeanor? His understated presence? The fact that she'd never heard his name before despite his extensive background? Or something else? Something she didn't want to examine too closely. He didn't fit my image of what a competent first officer looks like, she said finally, the admission tasting like ashes. Marcus nodded slowly. And what does a competent first officer look like, Laura? The question hung between them, loaded with implications Laura wasn't ready to face. Through the glass, she watched Ryan close his laptop, stand, and gather his flight bag. He moved with quiet efficiency, no wasted motion, no dramatic gestures. Everything about him suggested competence and experience, but she'd been too blinded by her own assumptions to see it. "I need to talk to him," Laura said suddenly. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "To apologize?" "To explain." Laura stood, straightening her uniform reflexively. "To clear the air so we can move forward professionally." "And if he doesn't want to move forward with you?" Marcus posed the question gently. "If he requests a different captain?" The possibility hadn't occurred to Laura. She'd been so focused on her own right to refuse a crew member, she hadn't considered that Ryan might refuse her. "Can he do that?" she asked. "He owns 37% of the company," Marcus reminded her. "He can do whatever he wants, but that's not really the question, is it?" Laura met his eyes, understanding dawning. "The question is whether he should have to." "Exactly." Marcus stood as well, moving toward the conference room door. Ryan could end this right now. One word to the board, one complaint about hostile work environment, and you'd be grounded pending investigation. But he hasn't done that. He filed his maintenance report, documented the safety issue, and now he's waiting to see what happens next. "Why?" Laura asked. "Why wouldn't he protect himself? Why wouldn't he demand a different captain after how I treated him?" Marcus paused at the door, his hand on the handle. "Maybe you should ask him that yourself." He left Laura alone in the conference room, surrounded by glass walls and the weight of her own mistakes. Laura watched through the window as Ryan walked toward the pilot lounge, his posture relaxed despite everything that had happened. He didn't look angry or vindictive. He didn't look like someone planning revenge or political maneuvering. He looked like a man doing his job, waiting patiently for others to do theirs. She forced herself to move, pushed through the conference room door and across the operations floor. Several staff members glanced up as she passed, their expressions carefully neutral. They'd all witnessed the confrontation on the tarmac, all heard her accusations and demands. They all knew she'd been wrong. The pilot lounge was a stark space. Industrial furniture, coffee maker gurgling in the corner, flight manuals stacked on metal shelves. Ryan sat in one of the chairs, a styrofoam cup steaming in his hand, his eyes focused on the window overlooking the terminal. Laura stopped in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. She'd commanded flight crews for 2 decades, given orders to first officers and cabin staff without hesitation. But approaching Ryan now felt like crossing a minefield. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice formal. Ryan glanced over, his expression unreadable. After a moment, he gestured to the empty chair across from him. Laura sat, her back straight, her hands folded in her lap. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that had been said and left unsaid. "I spoke with Marcus," she began finally. "He informed me of your background, your position with the company." Ryan took a sip of coffee, waiting. "I should have reviewed your file before making judgments about your competence," Laura continued, forcing the words out. "That was unprofessional of me." "Yes, it was," Ryan agreed quietly. The simple acknowledgement, without anger or accusation, somehow made Laura feel worse than if he'd shouted at her. "I was wrong about the hydraulic leak," she pressed on. "You were right to report it, right to insist on proper documentation. The maintenance crew confirmed it was a serious issue." "Yes, it was," Ryan said again, his tone unchanged. Laura's frustration bubbled up despite her intention to remain calm. "Are you going to make me apologize for every mistake individually? Because I can list them if that's what you need." Ryan set his coffee cup down carefully, his movements deliberate. "Captain Bennett, what exactly do you think I need?" The question caught her off balance. I don't know. An apology? An acknowledgement that I treated you unfairly?" "You've already acknowledged that," Ryan pointed out. "So what happens now?" "Now we move forward professionally," Laura said, trying to sound confident. "We put this morning behind us and focus on safe flight operations once the aircraft is cleared." Ryan studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching. "Do you trust me?" The directness of the question left Laura momentarily speechless. "Do you trust my judgment?" Ryan continued. "My ability to identify safety issues? My competence in the cockpit?" Laura wanted to say yes. She wanted to claim that learning about his background had changed her perception completely, but Ryan's steady gaze demanded honesty. "I don't know you well enough to trust you," she admitted. Ryan nodded, as if this was the answer he'd expected. Then we have a problem. Because I can't fly as your first officer if you don't trust me. Not safely, not effectively. But you're qualified, Laura began. Qualification isn't the same as trust, Ryan interrupted gently. You were right about that this morning, even if you were wrong about everything else. Flight crews need to trust each other. They need to communicate openly, support each other's decisions, verify each other's judgments. None of that works if the captain doesn't trust her first officer. He leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. So I'll ask you again, Captain Bennett, do you trust me? Not my resume, not my flight hours, not my position in the company, me. The person who'll be sitting beside you at 35,000 feet when something goes wrong. Laura looked into his eyes and saw patience mixed with something else, a kind of tired wisdom that suggested Ryan had been through versions of this conversation before. I don't know, she said honestly. I want to, but I don't know you. And what happened this morning, my reaction, my assumptions, I don't trust my own judgment about you anymore. The admission felt like defeat, but Ryan's expression softened slightly. That's fair, he said. At least it's honest. He picked up his coffee cup again, cradling it between his hands. You want to know why I didn't tell you who I was this morning? Why I let you make all those assumptions without correcting them? Laura nodded, not trusting her voice. Because I wanted to see how you'd treat someone you thought had no power, Ryan said simply. I wanted to know if you're the kind of captain who respects her crew or the kind who demands respect without earning it. The words should have stung, but they carried no malice. Just observation. And what did you learn? Laura asked. Ryan smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. I learned that you're scared. I learned that you fought so hard for respect that you see challenges everywhere, even where none exist. I learned that you'd rather be feared than trusted. Each statement landed with precision, stripping away the layers of justification Laura had built around her behavior. I've worked in aviation for 30 years, Ryan continued, military and civilian, large aircraft and small, commercial and private. And I've learned that the most dangerous pilots aren't the ones who lack skill. They're the ones who can't admit when they're wrong. The ones who prioritize their ego over safety. The ones who see crew coordination as a threat instead of a strength. He set his cup down on the small table between them. This morning, you exhibited all three of those behaviors, Captain Bennett, and that makes you dangerous, regardless of how many flight hours you've logged. The assessment was brutal in its accuracy. Laura felt exposed, every flaw and failure laid bare under Ryan's quiet scrutiny. So what do you want me to do? She asked, her voice rough. Do you want me to grovel? To beg your forgiveness? To resign so you can find a more agreeable captain? I want you to decide who you are, Ryan said. I want you to decide if you're the captain who can admit mistakes and learn from them, or the captain who doubles down on bad decisions to protect her pride. He stood, gathering his flight bag. The aircraft will be ready in about 3 hours. Marcus will assign me to whatever flight needs coverage. If that's your flight, then we'll work together professionally. If not, we'll probably never interact again. And if we do fly together, Laura asked, what then? Ryan paused in the doorway, looking back at her. Then you'll be the pilot in command, and I'll be your first officer. I'll follow your orders, support your decisions, and speak up when safety demands it. I'll do my job exactly the way I was trained to do it. That's it? Laura's voice carried surprise. After everything that happened, you'd just move forward like nothing occurred? I didn't say like nothing occurred, Ryan corrected. I said I'd do my job. What you do with yours is up to you. He walked out of the lounge, leaving Laura alone with the cold remains of her pride and the growing realization that she'd been tested this morning, and failed completely. The coffee in Laura's hand had gone cold, but she didn't notice. She sat in the pilot lounge long after Ryan left, staring at the empty doorway where he'd stood moments before delivering his devastating assessment of her character. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, marking time in a space that felt suddenly too small, too exposed. She'd been wrong. Not just about the hydraulic leak, not just about Ryan's qualifications. She'd been wrong about everything, her assumptions, her authority, her understanding of what command actually meant. The realization settled over her like ice water, shocking and inescapable. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Aircraft cleared. Maintenance signed off. Departing in 90 minutes. You're still PIC if you want it. if she wanted it. The conditional hung there, a question she'd never had to consider before. Laura Bennett always wanted command. Laura Bennett always flew. But did she deserve to? She forced herself to stand, to move, to walk back through the operations center where staff members carefully avoided her eyes. Everyone knew what had happened on the tarmac. Everyone had witnessed her humiliation, her wrongness, her spectacular failure of judgment. The bulletin board near dispatch caught her attention. Crew assignments, flight schedules, safety notices. And there, among the routine postings, a memorandum she'd never bothered to read. Reminder, owner pilots in active rotation. Please review personnel files before crew assignments to ensure appropriate coordination. The memo was dated 3 months ago. 3 months of warnings she'd ignored because she'd never imagined an owner would actually fly routes, would actually sit beside her in the cockpit, would actually submit to her command authority. Except Ryan hadn't submitted to anything. He'd simply done his job while she'd revealed exactly who she was beneath the 4 gold stripes and the perfect uniform. Laura pulled out her phone and opened the crew database, finding Ryan's file with fingers that trembled slightly. The photo showed him in a flight suit, squinting against bright sunlight, his expression serious but not severe. The text beside it read like a resume from someone who'd lived 3 different careers. United States Air Force, 12 years. Rescue operations, combat zones, medals for valor. Civilian transition through a regional carrier, rapid advancement to captain, then check airman. Move to fleet safety, implementation of new training protocols that reduced incident rates by 40%. Purchase of ownership stake in the company 5 years ago, followed by insistence on maintaining active flight status to stay connected to operational realities. Laura scrolled through his evaluation reports, each one glowing. Exceptional judgment under pressure. Natural leader who builds crew confidence. Safety focused without being rigid. Communicates with clarity and respect. She closed her eyes against the damning evidence of her own blindness. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Marcus. Ryan requested different assignment, found him a flight to Seattle. You'll have First Officer Martinez when she arrives in 40 minutes. Thought you should know. The words hit harder than any accusation could have. Ryan hadn't demanded her removal. He hadn't filed complaints or threatened her position. He'd simply asked to fly somewhere else, to work with someone else, to avoid the toxic dynamic she'd created. It was the most professional response possible, and somehow that made Laura feel worse than if he'd raged or retaliated. She typed a response to Marcus. I need to talk to Ryan before he leaves. The reply came quickly. He's in maintenance bay checking the repair work. Bay 7. Laura pocketed her phone and headed for the maintenance area, her heels clicking against polished floors that gave way to rough concrete. The maintenance bays smelled of hydraulic fluid and jet fuel, mechanical and honest. Workers in coveralls moved between aircraft with practiced efficiency, their competence evident in every gesture. Bay 7 housed their Boeing 737, now lowered from its jacks, the right landing gear assembly gleaming with fresh seals and new fittings. Ryan stood beside the lead maintenance technician, both of them examining a clipboard thick with documentation. The crack propagated from stress corrosion, the tech was explaining, pointing to something Laura couldn't see from her position near the bay entrance. The fitting was original equipment, over 15 years old, should have been replaced during the last major inspection, but it passed visual check. Until it didn't, Ryan said quietly. Until it didn't, the tech agreed. You probably saved a lot of lives this morning, catching that leak. Another few cycles and it would have failed catastrophically. Ryan's expression remained neutral, accepting the assessment without pride or satisfaction. Just doing the walk-around properly. Most pilots skip half the checklist, the tech countered, especially experienced ones. They think they know what they'll find, so they stop really looking. That's when you miss things, Ryan said. When you stop looking because you think you already know. The words carried weight beyond their surface meaning, and Laura felt them like arrows finding their mark. She stepped into the bay, her presence drawing both men's attention. The maintenance tech glanced between them, reading the tension, then made a diplomatic retreat. I'll file the final paperwork. Aircraft's cleared for service, First Officer Cole. Ryan nodded his thanks, waiting until the tech was out of earshot before turning his full attention to Laura. His expression was polite but distant, professional but wary. Captain Bennett, I heard you requested a different assignment, Laura said, dispensing with preamble. Seattle flight. Yes. Ryan's confirmation was simple, offering no explanation. Because of me. Because of us, Ryan corrected gently, because what happened this morning demonstrated that we can't work together effectively. That's not a failure on your part or mine, it's just reality. Laura moved closer to the aircraft, running her hand along the fuselage's cool metal surface. Marcus told me your background, your real background, the Air Force service, the rescue operations, the safety management position. I assumed he would, Ryan said. I should have read your file before making assumptions. Laura forced herself to meet his eyes. I should have treated you with professional respect regardless of your background. I should have done a lot of things differently this morning. Ryan studied her quietly, his expression unreadable. Should have. Past tense. I'm apologizing, Laura said, frustration creeping into her voice. I'm trying to acknowledge my mistakes and move forward professionally. I know what you're doing, Ryan replied, his tone still gentle but firm. I'm just not sure why you're doing it. Is this about wanting to work together, or is this about managing the political fallout of having treated an owner poorly? The question was fair and brutal in its honesty. Laura looked up at the aircraft, at the landing gear that had nearly failed, at the maintenance work that had prevented disaster. Both, probably. I'm not proud of that, but it's the truth. Something shifted in Ryan's expression. Not quite approval, but perhaps recognition of genuine honesty. At least you're being straight with me now, he said. Laura laughed, the sound bitter and tired. I wasn't very straight with you this morning. I made judgments based on nothing but my own prejudices and insecurities. I saw a quiet first officer I didn't recognize and assumed that meant you were incompetent. Why? Ryan asked. What about being quiet suggests incompetence? Laura hesitated, then pushed forward into uncomfortable truth. Because the first officers I respect are assertive, confident. They walk into a cockpit and claim their space. They don't defer or accommodate or wait patiently to be noticed. They perform, Ryan suggested. They make sure everyone knows they belong there. Yes, Laura admitted. Exactly that. Ryan nodded slowly. And I didn't perform. I just showed up and waited to do my job. You seem passive, Laura said, too yielding, like someone who'd gotten their position through connections rather than competence. Like someone who didn't have to prove themselves, Ryan finished. Someone who already knew they belonged. The observation landed like a revelation. Laura stared at him, seeing the trap she'd built for herself. She'd mistaken confidence for performance, substance for show. She'd needed Ryan to justify his presence because she'd spent 20 years justifying her own. I've fought for every stripe on this uniform, she said quietly. Every hour in the logbook, every rating, every command position. I've had to prove myself over and over while watching men advance with half my qualifications and twice my opportunities. I know, Ryan said simply. You know? Laura's voice sharpened. How could you possibly know what it's like to be questioned at every level, to have your competence doubted, to work twice as hard for half the recognition? Ryan's expression remained calm, but something flickered in his eyes. You're right. I don't know what it's like to be a woman in aviation. I don't know what battles you've fought or what prejudices you've faced. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But I do know what it's like to be doubted. I know what it's like to have people make assumptions based on appearance rather than ability. And I know what it's like to carry anger about that into every interaction, waiting for the next person to prove they're just like all the others. Laura felt the words like a mirror held up to her own face, reflecting back truths she'd been avoiding. This morning, Ryan continued, you looked at me and saw someone who didn't belong. Someone who threatened your authority, your standards, your hard-won respect. And instead of giving me a chance to prove myself, you decided I wasn't worth the effort. I was wrong, Laura said, the admission coming easier now. I was completely wrong about you. Yes, Ryan agreed. But that's not really the issue, is it? The issue is whether you've learned anything from being wrong, whether you'll treat the next quiet first officer differently, or whether you'll make the same assumptions all over again. The challenge was clear, and Laura had no easy answer. I don't know, she said honestly. I want to say I've learned something. I want to believe this morning changed how I see things, but I've been operating certain ways for so long, I'm not sure I can change even if I want to. Ryan's expression softened slightly. At least that's honest. They stood in silence for a moment, the maintenance bay quiet except for distant sounds of work being done on other aircraft. Laura watched mechanics move with practiced precision, following procedures, checking systems, ensuring safety through attention to detail, just like Ryan had done during his walk-around inspection. "Why did you find that leak?" Laura asked suddenly. "I mean, really, what made you look closely enough to spot something that small?" Ryan considered the question. "I have a daughter. She's 7 years old. Every time I fly, I think about her waiting for me to come home. I think about all the other families waiting for their people to come home. And I think about how many of them trust that pilots like us are doing everything right, checking everything properly, never cutting corners." He gestured toward the repaired landing gear. That leak was maybe 10 milliliters. Easy to miss, easy to dismiss as normal seepage. But 10 milliliters becomes 20, becomes 50, becomes a catastrophic failure at the worst possible moment. And somewhere, a 7-year-old girl loses her father because someone didn't want to delay a flight over something small. Laura felt the weight of that perspective settle over her. "So you check everything?" "I check everything," Ryan confirmed. "Even when it's inconvenient, even when it makes people angry, even when the captain thinks I'm incompetent for caring about details." The gentle rebuke was deserved, and Laura accepted it without defense. "I have that Seattle flight in 2 hours," Ryan said, checking his watch. "I should prepare." "Don't go," Laura said quickly, then amended. "I mean, fly with me instead. Let me prove I can do better than this morning." Ryan studied her carefully. "Why? What difference does it make who you fly with today?" "Because I need to know if I can fix this," Laura admitted. "I need to know if I'm capable of being the captain I thought I was, or if I've been fooling myself all along." "That's about you," Ryan pointed out. "What's in it for me? Why should I subject myself to flying with someone who's already demonstrated they don't trust or respect me?" The question was fair, and Laura had to dig deep for an honest answer. "Because I'm asking you to," she said finally. "Not demanding, not ordering, just asking. Give me one flight to prove I can be better than what you saw this morning." Ryan's expression remained neutral, giving nothing away. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything that had happened and everything that might happen next. "One flight," he said finally. "But on my terms." "What terms?" "If at any point I identify a safety concern, you listen without argument," Ryan said. "If I say something needs to be checked or logged or addressed, you trust that I have a reason. You don't have to agree with me, but you do have to hear me out." "Agreed," Laura said immediately. "And if this flight doesn't work, if we can't establish a functional working relationship, you don't make it my problem," Ryan continued. "You don't create a hostile work environment. You don't punish me for your own failures." The words stung, but Laura nodded. "Agreed." Ryan looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching for something, sincerity maybe, or genuine commitment to change. "Okay," he said finally, "one flight. Let's see if you mean what you say." They walked back to operations together, their silence more comfortable than the tension that had defined the morning. Marcus looked up as they entered, surprise crossing his features when he saw them together. "Change of plans?" he asked carefully. "First Officer Cole will be flying with me after all," Laura said, keeping her voice professional. "Assuming the Seattle flight can find other coverage." Marcus glanced at Ryan, who gave a slight nod. "I'll make it happen. Gates in 45 minutes. Weather looks clear, minimal delays expected." "We'll be ready," Ryan said. Laura moved to her crew mailbox, pulling out updated flight plans and weather reports. Beside her, Ryan did the same, their movements synchronized by routine and training. The normalcy of it felt strange after the morning's chaos. "Captain Bennett?" Ryan's voice was quiet, meant only for her. She turned. "Yes?" "Thank you for asking instead of demanding." His expression was serious but not unkind. "It matters." Laura felt something shift in her chest, something that might have been hope or might have been fear. "I'm going to mess this up, probably multiple times. I'm going to fall back into old habits and defensive patterns." "Probably," Ryan agreed, "but at least you're aware of it now. That's more than most people manage. They prepared for the flight in relative silence, reviewing checklists and confirming passenger counts. The gate area filled with travelers, business suits and vacation casual, families with small children and solo travelers with noise-canceling headphones. 143 lives that would trust Laura and Ryan to get them safely to their destination. The weight of that responsibility felt different now, more immediate and personal. In the cockpit, surrounded by switches and screens and the familiar geography of commercial aviation, Laura ran through her pre-flight checks with extra care. Beside her, Ryan did the same, his movements efficient and practiced. Hydraulic systems? Laura asked, following the checklist. Checked and verified, Ryan responded. Sounds. Pressure normal, fluid levels good, no visible leaks or anomalies. Landing gear? Down and locked, pins removed, gear bay doors secure. Visual inspection completed with no discrepancies noted. They continued through the checklist, their voices falling into the professional rhythm of crew coordination. Laura found herself actually listening to Ryan's responses, actually processing the information rather than just going through motions. Before we start engines, Ryan said quietly, I need to tell you something. Laura's hand stilled on the controls. What? This morning, when you refused to fly with me, my first instinct was to use my position to force the issue. To pull rank, make you look foolish, punish you for the humiliation. Ryan's honesty was unflinching. I'm not proud of that impulse, but it was there. Laura turned to face him fully. Why didn't you? Because that would have made me exactly what you accused me of being, someone who manipulates situations for personal gain rather than focusing on safe operations. Ryan met her eyes steadily. I don't want to be that person. Not even when I'm angry, not even when it would be justified. The confession was unexpected and disarming. Laura found herself respecting Ryan's honesty even as it highlighted her own failures. I wanted to hurt you this morning, she admitted. I wanted to put you in your place, prove my authority, make you regret questioning my judgment. That's not who I thought I was. That's not the captain I wanted to be. But it's who you were in that moment, Ryan said gently. The question is who you'll choose to be now. Laura looked out the cockpit window at the gate area, at the passengers beginning to board, at the ground crew preparing for pushback. All of it familiar, all of it routine, but somehow different now, weighted with new understanding. I choose to be better, she said finally. I choose to listen when my first officer speaks. I choose to value competence over confidence, substance over show. I choose to be the captain these passengers deserve. Ryan nodded slowly. Then let's fly. They completed the startup sequence, Laura calling out items from the checklist while Ryan verified and responded. The engines spooled up with their familiar whine, power building, systems coming online. Ground control cleared them for pushback, and the aircraft began its slow reverse movement away from the gate. Tower, this is November 437, Bravo, ready for taxi, Laura said into her headset, her voice steady and professional. November 437, Bravo, taxi to runway 28 via taxiway Alpha, wind 270 at 12 knots. Taxi to 28 via Alpha, November 437, Bravo. The aircraft rolled forward, joining the queue of planes waiting for departure. Morning sunlight streamed through the cockpit windows, turning the Denver skyline golden and sharp. I fly this route twice a month, Laura said as they waited their turn. I've landed at this destination airport over 300 times. I know every approach vector, every altitude restriction, every common traffic pattern. Okay, Ryan said, listening. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that when I make command decisions, they're based on experience and knowledge, not ego or stubbornness. Laura kept her eyes on the aircraft ahead of them. But I'm also telling you this because I realize now that experience can make you complacent, that knowing something well can make you stop really seeing it. She glanced at Ryan. Like that hydraulic leak. I probably would have missed it because I'd done that walk around so many times. I stopped actually looking. I just went through the motions. That happens to everyone eventually, Ryan said. The key is catching yourself before it becomes dangerous. How do you stay sharp? Laura asked. How do you avoid falling into that trap? Ryan considered the question. I imagine my daughter watching me do the inspection. I imagine having to explain to her why I skipped something or rushed through a check. Kids have this way of asking why about everything. It keeps you honest. The aircraft ahead of them lifted off, climbing steeply into the morning sky. Tower cleared them into position. November 437. Bravo, you're cleared for takeoff. Runway 28. Cleared for takeoff, 28, November 437. Bravo. Laura advanced the throttles smoothly, feeling the engines respond, feeling the aircraft accelerate down the runway. Beside her, Ryan monitored instruments, calling out speeds. 80 knots. Check. V1. Continue. Rotate. Laura pulled back on the yoke gently, and the aircraft lifted off the runway, Denver falling away beneath them. The landing gear retracted with familiar mechanical precision, the gear that Ryan's careful inspection had helped repair safely. Positive rate, Ryan called. Gear up, Laura confirmed. They climbed through scattered clouds, the Rocky Mountains spreading out to the west like a wall of stone and snow. Laura had flown this departure hundreds of times, but today she found herself noticing details she'd stopped seeing. The way light played across the peaks, the precise navigation points, the careful choreography of aircraft traffic. I need to tell you something, Laura said once they reached cruising altitude and engaged the autopilot. Something I'm not proud of. Ryan looked at her, waiting. This morning, before you arrived, I was reviewing crew assignments and saw a name I didn't recognize. My immediate thought was that scheduling had made a mistake, that they'd assigned me someone unqualified. Laura's hands rested on her lap, her confession measured but honest. I didn't even look at your file. I just decided you weren't good enough based on the fact that I didn't know you. Why are you telling me this? Ryan asked. Because I want you to understand that my behavior this morning wasn't about you. It was about my own insecurities, my own need to control everything, my own inability to trust people I haven't personally vetted. Laura met his eyes. You deserve better than that. Every first officer deserves better than that. Ryan was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Do you know why I bought into this company? Why I insisted on maintaining active flight status instead of just being an owner on paper? Laura shook her head. Because I've seen what happens when owners lose touch with operations. When they start making decisions based on spreadsheets instead of reality. When they prioritize profit over safety because they're not the ones sitting in the cockpit anymore. Ryan's voice carried conviction. I fly these routes because I need to remember what's actually at stake. Not quarterly earnings or stock prices, lives, families, the trust people place in us every time they board an aircraft. He gestured toward the cabin behind them. 143 passengers back there. They don't know about our conflict this morning. They don't know about the hydraulic leak or the delay or any of it. They just trust that we're competent and professional and committed to getting them home safely. And if we're not? Laura asked quietly. Then we have no business being in this cockpit, Ryan said simply. No amount of experience or authority or ownership stake changes that basic truth. The clarity of his perspective was both humbling and clarifying. Laura had spent 20 years focused on proving herself, on defending her position, on maintaining her hard-won respect. She'd forgotten the fundamental purpose beneath all of it. I've been a captain for 12 years, she said, and I think I've been doing it wrong the whole time. Ryan raised an eyebrow. That seems like an overstatement. Is it? Laura challenged. I've been so focused on being obeyed that I forgot about being trusted. So focused on maintaining authority that I stopped actually listening to my crew. I've been commanding instead of leading. Those are fixable mistakes, Ryan offered, if you're willing to do the work. Laura looked at him, this quiet first officer who'd revealed himself to be so much more than she'd imagined. Will you help me? Not just this flight, but going forward. Will you tell me when I'm falling into old patterns, when I'm prioritizing ego over safety? Ryan considered the request carefully. That's asking a lot. It puts me in a difficult position, your first officer and your conscience and your owner all at once. I know, Laura admitted, but I'm asking anyway. Because I think I need someone who isn't afraid of my authority, someone who'll tell me hard truths even when it's uncomfortable. And you think I'm that person? I think you're the person who found a hydraulic leak and reported it even though you knew it would cause problems. I think you're the person who walked away from a Seattle flight to give me another chance, even though I didn't deserve it. I think you're someone who actually lives the values I've been pretending to honor. Ryan's expression was impossible to read. Outside the cockpit windows, clouds stretched endlessly, a landscape of white and shadow. "One flight at a time, he said finally. "Let's see how this one goes before making long-term commitments." It was a reasonable response, and Laura accepted it with a nod. They flew in comfortable silence for several minutes, monitoring instruments, checking systems, doing the work that had brought them both to aviation in the first place. "Can I ask you something?" Ryan said eventually. "Anything. What made you want to be a pilot?" The question was simple but profound. Laura thought back to the young woman she'd been, the girl who'd dreamed of flying before she understood all the barriers standing in her way. "My father was a pilot," she said quietly. "Military transport, then commercial cargo. He used to take me to the airport when I was little, let me watch the planes take off and land. I thought it was magic, these massive machines defying gravity, carrying people across impossible distances." She smiled at the memory. "I told him I wanted to fly when I grew up, and he said, 'Then you'll fly.' Like it was that simple. Like there weren't 1,000 reasons why a girl from a working-class family probably wouldn't make it into a cockpit. But you did," Ryan observed. "But I did," Laura confirmed. "Through scholarships and stubbornness and refusing to quit even when instructors told me I didn't belong. My father died before I got my commercial license, but I like to think he would have been proud." "I'm sure he would have been," Ryan said gently. Laura felt unexpected emotion rising in her throat. "I don't know. Lately I've wondered if he'd recognize the pilot I've become. If he'd approve of how I've handled authority, how I've treated crew members, how I've forgotten why I wanted to fly in the first place." "Why did you want to fly?" Ryan asked. "In the beginning, before all the battles and politics and proving yourself. What was it about aviation that called to you?" Laura thought about that question, reaching past 20 years of defensiveness and struggle to find the core truth beneath. "Freedom," she said finally. "Not just the physical freedom of flight, but the freedom that comes from competence, from knowing you can handle whatever comes at you, from trusting yourself and your crew and your training." She paused. "I wanted to be part of something bigger than myself, part of a system that worked because everyone did their job well and trusted each other to do the same." "And somewhere along the way you stopped trusting," Ryan suggested. "Somewhere along the way I got tired of being questioned," Laura corrected. "I got tired of having to prove myself over and over. So I stopped trusting anyone I hadn't personally verified. I stopped giving people the benefit of the doubt. I stopped believing in the system because the system had failed me so many times." Ryan nodded slowly, understanding evident in his expression. "That makes sense. It's also incredibly lonely." The observation landed with unexpected force. Laura realized that Ryan was right. She'd been lonely for years, isolated by her own defenses, unable to truly connect with crew members because she couldn't let go of her need for control. "How do you do it?" she asked. "How do you stay open and trusting after everything you've seen, after combat and emergencies and all the ways things can go wrong?" Ryan thought for a moment. "I don't stay open by ignoring risks. I stay open by accepting that I can't control everything, and that trying to control everything actually makes things more dangerous, not less." He gestured toward the instrument panel. "These systems work because they're designed with redundancy and cross-checking built in. No single point of failure. No one person who has to be perfect. The same principle applies to crew dynamics. We're stronger when we trust each other, when we verify each other's work, when we're honest about limitations." "But what if that trust is misplaced?" Laura asked. "What if your first officer isn't competent? What if they miss something critical?" "Then you catch it during your own checks," Ryan said. "But you can't assume incompetence before you have evidence. You have to start from a position of trust and verify, not from a position of suspicion and defend." Laura absorbed that wisdom, feeling the truth of it even as part of her resisted. They were an hour into the flight when Ryan noticed something on the weather radar. He studied it for several seconds, his expression growing concerned. "Captain, I'm seeing a cell developing ahead of our route. Looks like it's building quickly." Laura leaned over to look at the display. The weather system was indeed growing, precipitation returned showing yellow and orange where there had been clear air moments before. Her first instinct was to dismiss it. She'd flown through worse, knew the aircraft could handle moderate turbulence, didn't want to delay their arrival with a diversion. But she caught herself, remembering Ryan's careful inspection, remembering her promise to listen without argument. "What are you thinking?" she asked instead. "I'm thinking we should request a deviation south," Ryan said. "Add maybe 15 minutes to our flight time, but keep us clear of that buildup." Laura studied the radar, her experience telling her they could probably penetrate the system without major issues. But Ryan's caution wasn't unfounded. The cell was developing unusually quickly, and weather radar didn't always show the full picture. "You're concerned about more than turbulence," Laura observed. "I'm concerned about what we can't see," Ryan confirmed. "That rate of development suggests strong updrafts, possible wind shear, conditions that could turn moderate turbulence into something more serious very quickly." It was a judgment call. The kind captains made dozens of times every flight, balancing efficiency against caution, experience against uncertainty. The old Laura would have overruled him, would have cited her 300 landings at this destination, would have pressed forward to maintain schedule. The new Laura, the one trying to be better, considered his perspective honestly. "Request the deviation," she decided. "Better to add 15 minutes than to push into conditions we're uncertain about." Ryan's expression showed surprise, quickly masked by professionalism. He keyed the radio. "Center, November 437 Bravo requesting deviation 20 miles south of course to avoid weather buildup." "November 437 Bravo deviation approved. Advise when able to return to course." They banked gently south, leaving their planned route to skirt the developing weather system. Laura watched the storm on radar, seeing it intensify even as they deviated, the precipitation returns blooming into deep reds and purples. 5 minutes later, another aircraft on their original route reported severe turbulence and hail damage, requesting immediate diversion. Laura and Ryan exchanged a glance, the unspoken communication louder than words. Ryan had been right. His caution had kept them out of conditions that would have been dangerous, possibly damaging. "Good call," Laura said quietly. Ryan nodded, accepting the acknowledgement without false modesty. "Thank you for trusting my judgment." The simple exchange felt like a turning point, a moment of genuine crew coordination built on mutual respect rather than hierarchy and fear. They flew the rest of the route in relative silence, comfortable now, their partnership finding its rhythm. When they began their approach, Laura found herself actually listening to Ryan's callouts, actually considering his input, actually working with him rather than just beside him. The landing was smooth, the touchdown gentle. As they taxied to the gate, Laura felt something she hadn't experienced in years, satisfaction that came from true collaboration rather than solo achievement. In the terminal, passengers deplaned with the casual indifference of people who'd never know how close they'd come to danger, who'd never know about the deviation that had kept them safe. Laura and Ryan completed their post-flight checks in the quiet cockpit, the familiar routine made new by their transformed dynamic. "That was good," Ryan said finally. "We worked well together." "We did," Laura agreed. Then, because she'd promised herself honesty, "Better than I expected, better than I deserved after this morning." Ryan considered her words carefully. "You know what I think? I think you're a good pilot who forgot why she started flying, but I think you're remembering now, and that's worth something." Laura felt unexpected emotion welling up. "Thank you for giving me the chance to remember." They walked through the terminal together, their flight bags identical, their uniforms marking them as equals in the essential work of keeping the sky safe. And for the first time in longer than Laura could remember, she felt like she truly belonged there. Not because of her stripes or her authority, but because she'd chosen to be better than her worst instincts. Because she'd chosen to listen instead of command, to trust instead of control, to lead instead of dominate. It was only one flight, only one chance to do things differently. But it was a beginning. The flight back to Denver 3 hours later felt different. Laura sat in the captain's seat with Ryan beside her. The cockpit transformed from a battlefield into what it was always meant to be, a workspace built on mutual competence and shared responsibility. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, painting instrument panels in warm gold, and Laura found herself thinking about beginnings rather than endings. But beginnings, she was learning, often required something to end first. They were halfway through the return flight when Marcus's voice crackled through their headset on the company frequency, cutting through the routine hum of engines and air traffic. "November 437. Bravo. Ops requesting post-flight debrief upon arrival. Captain Bennett and First Officer Cole, please report directly to my office. Laura and Ryan exchanged glances. Company debriefs weren't unusual, but the formality in Marcus's tone suggested this was more than routine paperwork. Copy that, Ops, Laura responded, keeping her voice neutral. We'll report immediately upon arrival. She switched back to approach frequency, but the ease she'd felt moments before had vanished, replaced by a familiar knot of anxiety. Debriefs meant scrutiny. They meant questions and documentation, and the possibility that someone higher up the chain had decided this morning's confrontation required official response. Ryan seemed to sense her tension. It's probably just standard follow-up on the maintenance issue, he offered quietly. Documenting the timeline, verifying procedures were followed. Or it's corporate deciding that a captain who publicly humiliates an owner needs to be dealt with, Laura said, her old defensiveness rising despite her best intentions. If that were the case, they wouldn't wait for a debrief, Ryan pointed out. They'd just ground you pending investigation. The logic was sound, but Laura's stomach remained tight with apprehension. She'd spent 20 years building her reputation, her record, her position. One mistake, one spectacular, witnessed by everyone mistake, could undo all of it. They landed without incident, the approach and touchdown smooth enough that passengers probably didn't even wake from their naps. Laura taxied to the gate with mechanical precision, going through shutdown procedures while her mind raced ahead to Marcus's office and whatever waited there. In the terminal, they walked side by side toward operations, their silence heavy with unspoken concern. Laura noticed the way ground staff watched them pass, the way conversations seemed to pause and resume in their wake. Word had spread about the morning's confrontation. In the close community of airport operations, drama traveled faster than departing aircraft. Marcus's office door was open, but the man himself stood with his back to them, staring out the window at the tarmac below. Two other people occupied chairs facing his desk. A woman in a corporate suit that screamed legal department, and a man Laura recognized as Paul Henderson, the company's director of flight safety. Her anxiety spiked into something closer to fear. Close the door, Marcus said, without turning around. Ryan shut the door quietly, and they both remained standing, waiting. Laura's mind cataloged every word she'd said that morning, every accusation and dismissal, building a defense she wasn't sure would matter. Marcus finally turned, his expression grave. Sit down, both of you. They sat. The woman from legal opened a leather portfolio, her pen poised over a yellow legal pad. Paul Henderson's weathered face showed nothing but professional neutrality. First, Marcus began, settling into his own chair, I want to confirm that the flight just completed proceeded without incident. Any issues, concerns, or discrepancies that need to be logged? No, sir, Laura said, falling into formal protocol. Flight was routine. We deviated south to avoid a developing weather system, but that's documented in the flight log. The deviation was appropriate and well executed, Ryan added. No passenger complaints, no mechanical issues, aircraft performed normally. Marcus nodded, making a note. Good. Now, let's talk about this morning. Laura's hands clenched in her lap, hidden beneath the edge of Marcus's desk. She forced herself to breathe evenly, to maintain composure even as her career potentially unraveled. I've received multiple reports, Marcus continued, from ground crew, gate staff, and maintenance personnel regarding the confrontation between Captain Bennett and First Officer Cole prior to the originally scheduled departure. I've also reviewed the maintenance logs, the delay documentation, and First Officer Cole's incident report. He paused, letting the weight of that information settle. Paul, you want to take this part? Paul Henderson leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. I've been in flight safety for 32 years. I've investigated hundreds of incidents, near misses, and crew coordination failures. What happened this morning displays concerning patterns I can't ignore. Laura felt her chest tighten. This was it. This was where they grounded her, where they documented her failure, where 20 years of work ended because she'd let her insecurities override her judgment. First Officer Cole's discovery of the hydraulic leak likely prevented a serious incident, Paul continued. The cracked fitting would have failed within the next few flight cycles. We're talking potential brake system failure, possible loss of directional control on landing, risk to passengers and crew. He pulled out a photograph showing the damaged fitting, the crack clearly visible even in the image. This is the kind of thing that ends up in NTSB reports, the kind of thing that destroys careers and companies and lives. Laura forced herself to look at the photograph, to really see what Ryan had found, what she would have missed in her arrogance. First Officer Cole followed proper procedure, Paul said. He identified the issue during walk-around, documented it immediately, and reported it through appropriate channels despite resistance from his captain. The words "despite resistance" hung in the air like an accusation. Captain Bennett, Paul turned his attention fully to Laura. Can you explain why you questioned First Officer Cole's report? Why you accused him of manufacturing a safety concern? The question was direct and damning. Laura felt Ryan shift slightly in the chair beside her, his presence a reminder that he was hearing all of this, that her worst moments were being documented and examined. I made an error in judgment, Laura said, keeping her voice steady through sheer force of will. I didn't know First Officer Cole. I hadn't flown with him before. When he reported the leak, I interpreted it as... She paused, choosing words carefully, as a challenge to my authority rather than a legitimate safety concern. Why? Paul's question was simple but brutal. Because I was defensive, Laura admitted. Because I'd already decided he wasn't qualified based on nothing but my own prejudices. Because I was more concerned with maintaining my authority than with actually listening to my crew. The legal representative made notes, her pen scratching across the yellow pad in sharp, precise strokes. Each word Laura spoke was being recorded, would become part of her permanent file, would follow her for the rest of her career. That's an honest answer, Paul acknowledged. But honesty doesn't erase the fact that you created a hostile work environment, undermined crew coordination, and potentially compromised safety by discouraging proper reporting of mechanical issues. Laura nodded, accepting the assessment without defense. Beside her, Ryan remained silent, his face carefully neutral. However, Paul continued, and something in his tone shifted slightly. What happened after the discovery is equally important to this investigation. He pulled out another document, this one showing the post-flight timeline. According to multiple witnesses, Captain Bennett did not attempt to retaliate against First Officer Cole after the leak was confirmed. She didn't file counter-complaints, didn't try to shift blame, didn't create additional conflict. Paul glanced at Ryan. And First Officer Cole, despite having every right to file a hostile work environment complaint, instead requested a simple crew reassignment without further escalation. That's correct, Ryan confirmed quietly. Why? Paul asked. Why not file the complaint? Why not protect yourself with official documentation of what happened? Ryan was quiet for a moment, considering. Because I wanted to see if Captain Bennett was capable of learning from the incident. Because filing a complaint would have ended any possibility of productive resolution. And because I believed the situation could be addressed without destroying someone's career over a mistake. The generosity of that response made Laura's throat tight with emotion she couldn't afford to show. Paul nodded slowly. And then, despite the morning's conflict, you both volunteered to fly together on the return flight. Marcus tells me that was Captain Bennett's request and First Officer Cole's agreement. Is that accurate? Yes, sir, Laura said. Walk me through that decision, Paul directed. Why would you request to fly with someone you just publicly humiliated? And Ryan, why would you agree? Laura took a breath, knowing this answer mattered perhaps more than any other. Because I needed to prove to myself that I could do better, that I could be the captain I thought I was, rather than the captain I'd revealed myself to be that morning. And because First Officer Cole deserved to see that I was capable of change, capable of actually listening and learning. Paul turned to Ryan. And your reason? Because Captain Bennett asked rather than demanded, Ryan said simply. Because she was honest about her failures rather than defensive. Because I thought she deserved the chance to prove she meant what she said. The legal representative made more notes. Marcus watched the exchange with an expression that might have been approval or might have been relief. The flight completed successfully, Paul said, referencing another document. Crew coordination was professional. Captain Bennett accepted First Officer Cole's recommendation to deviate for weather, a decision that kept you out of severe turbulence that damaged another aircraft. He set the papers down, looking between Laura and Ryan. So here's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing a captain who made serious errors in judgment but demonstrated capacity for self-correction. I'm seeing a first officer who prioritized resolution over retribution, and I'm seeing a crew that managed to transform a hostile dynamic into functional collaboration within the span of a single day. Paul leaned back in his chair. I'm also seeing patterns that concern me. Captain Bennett, this isn't the first time complaints have been filed about your crew coordination style. The words hit Laura like cold water. What complaints? The legal representative slid a thin file across Marcus's desk. Laura opened it with hands that trembled slightly, seeing documentation she'd never known existed. 3 separate incidents over the past 2 years, all involving conflicts with first officers, all resolved informally but documented nonetheless. First Officer Martinez reported that you frequently dismissed her input during flight operations, Paul read from the file. First Officer Chen noted that you created an intimidating work environment that discouraged safety reporting. First Officer Williams stated that you treated crew coordination as a chain of command issue rather than collaborative teamwork. Laura felt sick. She'd known her style was direct, demanding, uncompromising. She hadn't known it was driving people away, silencing voices that might have kept flight safer. I didn't know, she whispered. That's part of the problem, Paul said, not unkindly. You've been so focused on defending your authority that you stopped noticing the impact of your command style. And in aviation, that kind of blindness can be deadly. He pulled out one more document, this one showing statistics. Crew coordination failures contribute to over 70% of aviation accidents, not mechanical failures, not weather, not system malfunctions. Breakdowns in communication, trust, and collaborative decision-making. Paul's finger traced down the page. Every one of these incidents started the same way. A captain who didn't listen, a first officer who didn't speak up, a culture that prioritized hierarchy over safety. And every one of them could have been prevented if crews functioned as actual teams rather than dictatorships. Laura forced herself to read the statistics, the accident reports, the names of flights that had ended in disaster because captains like her had forgotten how to listen. So what happens now? She asked, her voice barely steady. Am I grounded? Under investigation? Terminated? Marcus and Paul exchanged glances. The legal representative's pen paused over her notepad. That depends, Paul said carefully, on whether you're willing to do the work necessary to change your command style, and whether you're willing to accept accountability not just for this morning, but for the pattern of behavior that led to this morning. Laura looked at Ryan, who met her eyes steadily. No judgment there, but no rescue either. This was her decision, her responsibility, her chance to choose who she wanted to be. I'm willing, she said. Tell me what I need to do. Paul nodded, as if this was the answer he'd been hoping for. Mandatory crew resource management training starting next week. You'll work with our senior instructor on communication skills, collaborative decision-making, and conflict resolution. You'll also meet monthly with me for flight safety reviews until I'm confident the behavioral patterns have changed. He paused, his expression serious. And you'll be paired with First Officer Cole for your next 20 flights. He'll provide feedback on your crew coordination, and his assessments will be part of your performance review. Laura's eyes widened. 20 flights? That's nearly 3 months of learning to work as an actual crew, Paul interrupted. 3 months of building trust instead of demanding obedience. 3 months of proving you can change not just for one flight, but consistently over time. He looked at Ryan. If you're willing. This is above and beyond your normal duties, and I understand if you'd prefer not to take on this additional responsibility. Ryan was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. Laura held her breath, waiting for him to refuse, to protect himself from 3 months of flying with someone who'd treated him so poorly. I'm willing, Ryan said finally. On one condition. Name it, Paul said. This can't be punitive, Ryan stated clearly. I'm not interested in being Captain Bennett's supervisor or monitor or babysitter. If we do this, we do it as equals working to build a better crew dynamic. Otherwise, it won't work. Paul considered this, then nodded. Agreed. You'll provide feedback, but Captain Bennett retains full command authority. This is about changing behavior through experience, not through punishment. Laura felt something shift inside her, relief mixed with apprehension, mixed with gratitude for Ryan's willingness to invest in her improvement. There's one more thing, Marcus said, speaking for the first time since Paul had taken over. Captain Bennett, I need to ask you directly. Do you understand why what happened this morning was serious? Do you understand the full scope of what could have gone wrong? Laura thought about the cracked fitting, about the brake system that would have failed, about 143 passengers who would have been at risk because she'd been too proud to listen. Yes, she said quietly. I understand that my ego could have killed people. I understand that treating crew members as threats rather than partners creates exactly the kind of environment where safety concerns get ignored. I understand that being a captain isn't about being obeyed. It's about creating a cockpit culture where everyone feels empowered to speak up when something's wrong. Marcus studied her face, searching for sincerity. And if you'd missed that hydraulic leak? If you'd taken off without Ryan's inspection catching it? What then? The question was hypothetical, but devastating. Laura forced herself to think through the scenario completely. We would have lost brake pressure during approach or landing, she said slowly. Depending on when the fitting failed, we might have had partial or complete loss of stopping capability. On a wet runway or with crosswinds, that could have meant a runway excursion, possible collision with obstacles or other aircraft. She paused, the full weight settling over her. People could have died, not because of mechanical failure, because of my failure to listen. Because I created an environment where my first officer had to fight to report a safety issue instead of being immediately believed and supported. And that can never happen again, Marcus said, his tone leaving no room for argument. It won't, Laura promised. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure it won't. The legal representative closed her portfolio, apparently satisfied that the necessary points had been covered. Paul gathered his documents, his expression marginally less severe than when they'd started. We'll reconvene in 3 months, Paul said. At that point, we'll review your progress, assess crew feedback, and determine if additional intervention is necessary. Until then, you're cleared to fly under the conditions we've discussed. Laura nodded, understanding the unspoken message. This was her last chance. One more incident, one more pattern of hostile behavior, and there would be no more opportunities for correction. Marcus stood, signaling the meeting's end. Laura, Ryan, thank you for your honesty today. This wasn't an easy conversation, but it was a necessary one. Paul and the legal representative left, their footsteps echoing down the hallway. Laura and Ryan remained seated, the weight of the past 12 hours settling over them like exhaustion. 3 months, Laura said finally. You really signed up for 3 months of flying with me? Ryan's expression was unreadable. I signed up for 3 months of seeing if we can build something better than what we had this morning. There's a difference. Why? Laura asked, the question encompassing everything. Why give her another chance? Why invest his time and energy? Why believe she could change? Because I've seen what you're capable of when you actually listen, Ryan said. That flight today? The way you handled the weather deviation, the way you processed my input, the way you trusted my judgment, even when it meant deviating from your plan. That's the captain you could be all the time. He stood, gathering his flight bag. But I've also seen what you are when you let fear and pride override your judgment. And that captain is dangerous, Laura. Not just to yourself, but to everyone who flies with you. The brutal honesty should have hurt, but instead Laura felt oddly grateful for it. Ryan wasn't coddling her, or pretending the problem was smaller than it was. He was giving her the truth, delivered with the same quiet directness he'd shown all day. I want to be better, she said. I need to be better. Then prove it, Ryan replied. Not just tomorrow or next week, but consistently over time. Prove that today wasn't a fluke. Prove that you can change not just your behavior, but your whole approach to command. He paused at the door, looking back. I believe you can do it, Laura. But believing isn't enough. You have to do the work. After Ryan left, Laura sat alone in Marcus's office, staring at the flight logs and incident reports scattered across his desk. Evidence of her failure, documentation of patterns she'd been blind to, proof that the captain she thought she was existed only in her own mind. Her phone buzzed, a text from her sister asking about dinner plans, normal life intruding on the wreckage of her professional identity. Laura ignored it, unable to face casual conversation when her entire understanding of herself had been dismantled. Marcus returned 20 minutes later, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Laura without comment, settling back into his chair with the weariness of someone who'd spent too many hours managing crises. You know what the ironic thing is? He said after a long silence. You're one of our best pilots in terms of technical skill. Your landings are textbook perfect. Your system knowledge is exceptional. Your decision-making in actual emergencies has been consistently sound. He sipped his coffee, grimacing at the temperature. But none of that matters if you can't work with your crew. None of that technical excellence makes any difference if you create an environment where people are afraid to speak up. I know, Laura said quietly. Do you? Marcus challenged. Because I've been watching this pattern develop for 2 years, Laura. I've seen you become more defensive, more controlling, more isolated. And I've watched good first officers request reassignments rather than deal with your command style. The revelation stung. Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you pull me aside and tell me I was creating problems? I did, Marcus said flatly. 3 times in the past 18 months. But you dismissed my concerns as me being oversensitive, me not understanding the pressures of command, me coddling weak pilots who couldn't handle direct communication. Laura's memory provided the conversation she'd forgotten or reinterpreted, the warnings she'd dismissed as Marcus being politically correct or overly cautious. She'd been so certain of her righteousness, so convinced that her approach was necessary and justified. I'm sorry, she whispered. Don't apologize to me, Marcus said. Apologize to the first officers who requested transfers. Apologize to the crew members who stopped speaking up because they learned their input wasn't valued. Apologize to Ryan for the humiliation you put him through this morning. He set his coffee down, leaning forward. But more than that, Laura, do better. Actually change, because I can't protect you anymore. One more incident like this morning and corporate won't care about your technical skills or your flight hours. They'll ground you permanently. The finality in his voice made clear this wasn't hypothetical. The crew resource management training starts Monday, Marcus continued. You'll work with Captain Sarah Chen, yes, the same First Officer Chen who reported your intimidating work environment. She's one of our best instructors now, and she's agreed to work with you despite your history. Laura flinched at the connection. First Officer Chen, who she'd dismissed as too soft, too deferential, too unwilling to handle the demands of professional aviation. The same Chen who'd apparently been competent enough to become a training captain while Laura had been busy defending her authority. I'll be there, Laura said. And you'll actually engage with the material, Marcus pressed. Not just sit through the classes and dismiss everything as theoretical nonsense that doesn't apply to real flight operations. I'll engage, Laura promised. Marcus studied her for a long moment, searching for sincerity. I've known you for 20 years, Laura. I remember when you were a young first officer fighting for every opportunity, proving yourself against people who didn't think women belonged in cockpits. You were fierce and determined and absolutely committed to excellence. His expression softened slightly. Somewhere along the way, that fierce determination turned into rigid defensiveness. That commitment to excellence turned into inability to accept input. You became so focused on proving you deserved to be there that you forgot how to actually be there. Present, collaborative, open to learning. The observation cut deep because it was true. Laura could trace the transformation, could see how each battle fought and won had hardened her, how each challenge overcome had made her less flexible, how each year of proving herself had made her less capable of accepting that she might be wrong. How do I get back? She asked. How do I become the pilot I was before all the defensiveness and fear? Marcus smiled faintly. You don't. You can't go backward, Laura, but you can go forward differently. You can choose to be someone new, someone who kept the strength and determination but added wisdom and humility, someone who learned from mistakes rather than pretending they never happened. He stood, indicating the conversation was ending. Go home. Rest. Think about who you want to be. And Monday morning, show up ready to do the hardest work of your career, changing yourself. Laura left the airport as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed too beautiful for the day she'd had. Her car sat in the employee lot where she'd left it that morning, a lifetime ago when she'd been certain of her righteousness and her authority. She sat in the driver's seat without starting the engine, watching the last flights of the day take off into the darkening sky. Each aircraft carried people who trusted the pilots to get them home safely, who never thought about the crew dynamics or communication patterns, or all the small decisions that meant the difference between safe arrival and disaster. Her phone showed 17 missed messages, friends asking about dinner, her sister wanting to talk, colleagues sending routine flight information. Laura ignored all of it, pulling up Ryan's personnel file instead, reading it properly for the first time. The information Marcus had shared that morning barely scratched the surface. Ryan had flown rescue missions in Afghanistan, had received commendations for valor under fire, had transitioned to civilian aviation with the specific goal of improving safety culture in commercial operations. His ownership stake in the company had come from investing his military retirement and savings into buying aircraft during a financial downturn, helping save the company from bankruptcy. Everything about his background suggested competence, integrity, commitment to excellence. And Laura had dismissed him in 30 seconds based on nothing but her own insecurities. She drove home on autopilot, her mind replaying the day's events in excruciating detail. The confrontation on the tarmac, the discovery of the hydraulic leak, Ryan's quiet dignity in the face of her accusations, the debrief in Marcus's office, the documentation of patterns she'd been blind to. Her apartment felt empty and cold. Laura changed out of her uniform mechanically, hanging it in the closet beside 20 years of identical jackets and pants, 4 gold stripes gleaming in the dim light, symbols of authority she'd wielded like weapons rather than responsibilities. She made tea she didn't drink, sat on her couch staring at nothing, tried to reconcile the captain she thought she was with the captain everyone else had been experiencing. The disconnect was staggering. She genuinely believed she was maintaining high standards, protecting safety, ensuring excellence. She hadn't seen that she was actually creating exactly the kind of toxic environment that led to disasters. Her phone buzzed with one more message, this one from Ryan. Monday 0600 Training Room C. I'll bring coffee. We'll figure this out together. The simple kindness of that message, after everything she'd done, after all the humiliation and conflict, broke something open inside Laura. She sat on her couch and cried, not from shame or fear, but from the overwhelming recognition that she'd been given a gift she didn't deserve. A second chance, an opportunity to become better, a partner willing to help her transform from who she'd been into who she might become. The work would be hard. The changes would be painful. The process would require dismantling 20 years of defensive patterns and rebuilding from foundations she'd forgotten existed. But as Laura sat in her quiet apartment watching the last light fade from the sky, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Hope that she could change. Hope that the Captain Ryan had seen glimpses of during their flight could become who she was consistently. Hope that accountability, properly accepted, could lead to transformation rather than destruction. 3 months of flying together, 20 flights to prove she could learn, could change, could become the kind of captain who created safety through collaboration rather than demanded obedience through fear. It was a beginning, not an ending, not a resolution, but a genuine beginning. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Laura was ready to begin. Monday morning arrived cold and clear, the kind of winter day where Denver's sky stretched endless and blue above snow-capped mountains. Laura sat in her car in the airport parking lot at 5:45, 15 minutes early for a meeting she both dreaded and needed. The training facility loomed ahead, its windows dark except for a single lit room on the second floor where her transformation would either begin or her career would end. She'd spent the weekend reading crew resource management materials, watching accident investigation videos, confronting the brutal reality of what happened when captains stopped listening. Flight after flight where experienced pilots had ignored input from first officers, where hierarchical cockpit cultures had silenced voices that might have prevented disaster. Names and dates and final moments that could have been different if someone had simply chosen collaboration over command. The statistics haunted her. 73% of aviation accidents involved some element of crew coordination failure. Not mechanical problems, not impossible weather, not unavoidable catastrophe. Human failure, captain failure, her kind of failure. Ryan's truck pulled into the lot at 5:55, precise as everything else about him. He emerged carrying 2 travel mugs and a folder thick with documentation, his expression neutral but not cold. When he saw Laura waiting by the entrance, he offered a small nod of acknowledgement. "You're early," he observed, handing her one of the coffee mugs. I didn't want to be late, Laura admitted, accepting the coffee with hands that trembled slightly. Didn't want to start this by making you wait. It's a good start, Ryan said simply. They walked into the training facility together, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. Training room C was a standard classroom setup, tables arranged in a U shape, whiteboards covering 2 walls, a projection screen at the front. But what caught Laura's attention was the woman standing at the front of the room, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, her expression professionally pleasant but guarded. Captain Sarah Chen, the first officer Chen who'd reported Laura's intimidating work environment 2 years ago. The woman Laura had dismissed as too sensitive, too conflict-averse, too unwilling to handle the demands of professional aviation. Captain Bennett, Sarah said, her voice carefully neutral. Thank you for being on time. Please, have a seat. Laura sat, feeling like a student called to the principal's office. Ryan settled beside her, his presence somehow both comforting and challenging. A reminder of why they were here, what had brought them to this reckoning. Sarah pulled up a presentation on the screen, but she didn't start with slides or statistics. Instead, she looked directly at Laura, her expression shifting from professional neutrality to something more personal. Before we begin the formal curriculum, I need to ask you something, Sarah said. Do you remember our last flight together? 3 years ago, the approach into Boston during that winter storm? Laura's memory provided fragments, heavy snow, difficult visibility, a first officer who'd seemed hesitant about her decision to continue the approach rather than divert. I remember, Laura said carefully. Do you remember what I told you? Sarah pressed. What I said about the wind shear reports from aircraft ahead of us? Laura tried to recall the specific conversation, but the details were fuzzy, lost in hundreds of similar flights and approaches. I don't remember the exact words, she admitted. Sarah nodded, as if this was the answer she'd expected. I told you that 2 aircraft ahead of us had reported severe wind shear on final approach. I suggested we execute a missed approach and divert to our alternate airport. Do you remember what you said to me? The memory clicked into place suddenly, sharp and uncomfortable. Laura had been annoyed at the suggestion, had felt it undermined her authority as pilot in command. I told you to trust my experience, Laura said quietly. I told you I'd landed at Boston in worse conditions and that you needed to have more confidence in my abilities. You told me that if I was too scared to handle difficult approaches, maybe I should consider a different career, Sarah corrected, her voice steady but pointed. You told me that second-guessing the captain was unprofessional and dangerous. The words hit Laura like physical blows. She had no memory of being that harsh, but Sarah's certainty made clear it had happened exactly as she described. We continued the approach, Sarah went on. We landed safely, and you logged it as a routine flight. But what you didn't know, what I never told you because you'd made it clear my input wasn't welcome, was that I'd already decided that would be my last flight as your first officer. I requested a permanent crew change the next day. Laura felt Ryan shift slightly beside her, his attention focused on Sarah's testimony. Why are you telling me this now? Laura asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. Because in 3 months, I'm going to evaluate whether you've genuinely changed or whether you've just learned to hide your patterns better, Sarah said bluntly. And I need you to understand that I know exactly who you were. I experienced it firsthand. So when we work through these modules, when we discuss crew dynamics and communication and collaborative decision-making, I'll know if you're actually engaging or just performing. The challenge was clear and fair. Laura nodded slowly, accepting it. I was wrong, she said, about that approach, about dismissing your concerns, about telling you to trust my experience instead of actually listening to what you were saying. I was wrong then, and I've been wrong in the same ways over and over since then. Sarah studied her for a long moment, then something in her expression softened fractionally. At least you're being honest now. That's more than I got 3 years ago. She pulled up the first slide, a simple question in large text. What is a captain's primary responsibility? Laura had answered this question hundreds of times in training, in evaluations, in casual conversations with other pilots. The answer was automatic, ingrained through years of repetition. Safe operation of the aircraft and protection of passengers and crew, she recited. That's the textbook answer, Sarah agreed. Now tell me what you actually believed your primary responsibility was. Not what the manual says, but what drove your decisions in real cockpit situations. The question demanded deeper honesty than Laura was comfortable providing, but Ryan's quiet presence beside her reminded her that surface-level answers wouldn't accomplish anything. I believed my primary responsibility was maintaining my authority, Laura admitted, proving I deserved to be in command, making sure no one questioned my competence or my right to make decisions. Sarah nodded, as if this confession was both expected and necessary. And how did that belief affect your crew coordination? Laura thought about Ryan on the tarmac, about Sarah during that Boston approach, about all the first officers who'd offered input she'd interpreted as challenges rather than collaboration. It made me defensive, she said. It made me see questions as attacks and suggestions as attempts to undermine me. It made me prioritize protecting my ego over actually listening to safety concerns. Which is exactly the mentality that leads to disasters, Sarah said, pulling up the next slide showing the wreckage of a commercial aircraft flight number and date stark against the image. Korean Air Flight 801. Experienced captain, qualified crew, routine approach. First officer and flight engineer both noticed problems, but failed to communicate effectively because the cockpit culture discouraged challenging the captain's authority. Laura knew this case study, had reviewed it in her own training years ago, but seeing it now through the lens of her own behavior made the connection visceral and undeniable. Sarah continued through a series of accidents, each one showing the same pattern: hierarchical cockpit culture, silenced crew members, captains who wouldn't listen until it was too late. United 173 running out of fuel while the captain focused on landing gear and ignored warnings about fuel state. Avianca 52 crashing because the first officer couldn't effectively communicate the severity of their fuel emergency. Tenerife, the deadliest accident in aviation history, partly caused by a captain's impatience overriding proper procedures. Notice the pattern, Sarah said. In every case, there were crew members who saw the problem, who knew something was wrong, who tried to speak up. But the captain's authority created an environment where those warnings couldn't be heard effectively. She turned from the screen to look directly at Laura. You created that same environment. Maybe not to the same extreme, maybe not with the same catastrophic results, but the pattern was identical. And if it had continued unchecked, eventually you would have ended up in a situation where someone's silence, caused by your intimidation, would have led to disaster. The assessment was brutal and accurate. Laura felt Ryan's eyes on her, waiting to see how she'd respond. I understand, she said quietly. I understand that my behavior was creating exactly the kind of toxic dynamic that kills people. And I understand that being technically proficient doesn't matter if I can't work effectively with my crew. Sarah's expression suggested cautious approval. Good. That's the foundation we're building from. Now, let's talk about what effective crew coordination actually looks like. The next 3 hours were intensive and uncomfortable. Sarah walked them through communication techniques, decision-making frameworks, and conflict resolution strategies. But more than the theoretical content, she pushed Laura to examine specific incidents from her own career, to identify moments where her defensiveness had prevented effective collaboration. Ryan participated actively, offering his perspective from the first officer's seat, describing what it felt like to work with captains who listened versus captains who commanded. His observations were pointed but not cruel, honest without being vindictive. When you dismissed my concern about the hydraulic leak, Ryan said during one discussion, it wasn't just about that specific incident. It was about establishing that my judgment wasn't trustworthy, that my input wasn't valued, that speaking up would be met with hostility rather than consideration. He paused, choosing words carefully. If I hadn't been an owner, if I hadn't had the confidence that comes from knowing I couldn't be easily fired, I might have backed down. I might have stayed silent and let you make that decision. And then we would have taken off with a cracked hydraulic fitting, and the outcome could have been catastrophic. Laura absorbed that perspective, understanding for the first time how her authority had functioned as both shield and weapon, protecting her from challenges but also preventing the very collaboration that kept flights safe. How do I fix it? She asked. How do I create an environment where first officers feel comfortable speaking up, where they trust that I'll actually listen? You start by actually listening, Sarah said simply. Not just hearing words, but genuinely considering input. Not just allowing people to speak, but actively soliciting their perspective. not just tolerating questions but encouraging them. She pulled up a video showing a crew coordination exercise, two pilots working through an emergency scenario. The captain in the video consistently checked with his first officer, verified decisions, asked for input, even when time was limited. Notice his language, Sarah pointed out. He doesn't say, "I've decided," or "We're doing this." He says, "What do you think? And do you see any problems with this approach?" He's building a culture where the first officer's judgment is valued, where speaking up is expected rather than tolerated. Laura watched the video carefully, seeing the difference between command and collaboration, between authority and partnership. The captain in the video had confidence without arrogance, decisiveness without rigidity. He led without dominating, decided without dismissing. "That's the captain I want to be," Laura said quietly. "Then that's the captain you'll practice being," Sarah replied. "Starting today. Starting with every interaction, every flight, every moment in the cockpit." The training session ended at noon, but Sarah pulled Laura aside before they left. "I want you to know something," Sarah said, her voice lower, more personal. "When Marcus asked me to take on this assignment, my first instinct was to refuse. The idea of working with you again, of putting myself back in a position where I might be dismissed or intimidated, felt like asking for unnecessary pain." Laura felt shame wash over her, but she forced herself to meet Sarah's eyes. "But then I thought about all the first officers who might fly with you in the future," Sarah continued. "All the crew members who deserve to work with a captain who actually values their input. And I thought about the Laura Bennett I flew with on my very first commercial flight, before you became defensive and rigid. That captain was patient and encouraging. She taught me things. She made me feel like I belonged in that cockpit." Sarah's expression softened slightly. That captain is still in there somewhere, and if there's any chance of bringing her back, of helping you remember why you wanted to fly in the first place, then this work is worth doing. The unexpected grace in those words made Laura's throat tight. "Thank you," she managed. "Thank you for being willing to try." Sarah nodded, then left, her footsteps echoing down the empty hallway. Ryan remained, gathering materials, giving Laura space to process. When she finally turned to him, he was watching her with that same quiet assessment he'd shown on the tarmac days ago. "That was harder than I expected," Laura admitted. "It's supposed to be hard," Ryan said. "Change is always hard, especially when it requires confronting uncomfortable truths about yourself." They walked to the parking lot together, the midday sun bright and cold. Laura's car sat next to Ryan's truck, their vehicles side by side like their professional partnership, parallel but separate, connected but individual. "Same time Wednesday?" Ryan asked, referencing their next training session. "I'll be here," Laura confirmed. Then, because honesty had become her new default, "I'm scared, Ryan. I'm scared I'll fail at this, that I'll fall back into old patterns and prove everyone right about me being unable to change." Ryan considered her words carefully. "You know what I think? I think being scared is appropriate. It means you understand the stakes, understand what you're trying to accomplish. If you weren't scared, I'd be worried you weren't taking this seriously." He unlocked his truck, then paused. "But Laura, fear can't be your only motivation. Eventually you have to want to change, not because you're afraid of consequences, but because you genuinely believe collaboration makes you a better pilot, because you actually value your crew members' perspectives, because you understand that being a great captain means building great teams, not just maintaining your authority." The observation was incisive and true. Laura nodded slowly, accepting it. Over the following weeks, Laura threw herself into the work with the same intensity she'd once applied to proving her competence. She attended every training session, completed every assignment, practiced new communication techniques until they felt less foreign. And she flew with Ryan, 20 flights that became a masterclass in humility and growth. Their third flight together, Ryan caught an error in her fuel calculations. Laura's first instinct was defensive. She'd been calculating fuel loads for 20 years. How could she have made a mistake? But instead of dismissing his concern, she reviewed the numbers again and found he was right. She'd transposed 2 digits, a small error that would have meant arriving at their destination with less reserve fuel than regulations required. "Thank you for catching that," she said, making the correction. Ryan's surprise was visible for just a moment before his expression settled back into professional neutrality. That's what first officers are for. By their seventh flight, Laura found herself actively soliciting Ryan's input on approach decisions, genuinely considering his perspective rather than just going through the motions of collaboration. When he suggested a different approach angle based on wind conditions, she didn't just accept it. She asked him to explain his reasoning so she could learn from his analysis. "You're getting better at this," Ryan observed during their post-flight debrief. "It's still not natural," Laura admitted. "I still have to consciously remind myself to ask instead of tell, to listen instead of dismiss. But it's getting easier." "That's how change works," Ryan said. "Conscious effort becomes habit, becomes character. You're doing the work, Laura. It shows." Their 15th flight tested everything Laura had been learning. They encountered unexpected severe turbulence over the Rockies, the kind of rough air that demanded immediate decisions and coordinated crew response. Laura's instinct was to handle it herself, to make command decisions without consultation because that's what captains did in emergencies. But she caught herself, forced herself to engage Ryan even as the aircraft bucked and passengers gasped. "First officer, I'm seeing increasing turbulence ahead. What's your assessment?" Ryan's voice was steady despite the rough air. "Recommend immediate altitude change. Request climb to flight level 390 to get above this cell. I'm seeing the worst returns between our current altitude and 37,000 feet." Laura's old self would have dismissed this as overcautious, would have maintained altitude and powered through the turbulence to avoid deviating from the flight plan. The new Laura, the one she was still learning to be, actually considered his recommendation. "Agreed. Request altitude change." They climbed above the turbulence, the ride smoothing out as they reached calmer air. Behind them in the cabin, flight attendants checked on shaken passengers, but no one was injured. Nothing was damaged. "Good call," Laura said once they'd leveled off. "I was about to try writing it out, but your solution was better." "We're a crew," Ryan said simply. "Sometimes you'll have the better answer, sometimes I will. The point is we both contribute." By their 20th flight together, Laura noticed something had shifted fundamentally. She no longer had to force herself to solicit input. It had become genuinely automatic. She trusted Ryan's judgment not because she feared consequences, but because she'd learned through experience that his perspective made her decisions better. They'd become an actual crew, coordinated and collaborative, each bringing their strengths to create something more effective than either could accomplish alone. The final evaluation came on a cold morning in late February, nearly 3 months after that confrontation on the tarmac. Sarah Chen sat in the jump seat observing their crew coordination, while Paul Henderson monitored from the ground, reviewing recordings and documentation. Laura and Ryan flew their route with the easy synchronization of a crew that had learned to work together effectively. When Laura noticed a fuel discrepancy, she immediately brought Ryan into the problem-solving process. When Ryan identified a potential weather issue, Laura listened and adjusted their flight plan accordingly. They communicated constantly, verified each other's work, built redundancy and cross-checking into every decision. After they landed and completed their post-flight procedures, Sarah remained in the jump seat, her evaluation form complete but her expression unreadable. "That was good," she said finally. "Really good. You worked together like a crew that's been flying together for years, not months. The communication was clear, the decision-making was collaborative, the trust was evident." Laura felt relief flood through her, but Sarah held up a hand. "But here's my question. Is this sustainable? Or is this performance something you can maintain for 3 months under observation, but that will fade once the scrutiny ends?" The question was fair and challenging. Laura thought about it carefully before answering. 3 months ago, I would have said I was performing," she admitted. "I would have told you I was just doing what was necessary to keep my job, to satisfy the requirements, to get through the probation period." She glanced at Ryan, who listened with his characteristic quiet attention. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being performance and started being genuine. "I stopped asking for input because I was supposed to, and started asking because I actually wanted to hear it. I stopped seeing crew coordination as a box to check, and started seeing it as what makes me a better pilot." Sarah made notes on her evaluation form, her expression still neutral. What changed? What made it shift from obligation to authentic practice? Laura thought about the past 3 months. about the flights and training sessions and conversations that had gradually transformed her understanding of what command actually meant. "I stopped being afraid," she said finally. "I stopped being afraid that listening made me weak, that considering other perspectives meant I wasn't competent, that collaboration undermined my authority. I realized that the captains I most respected, the ones who had long, safe careers, the ones who built strong crews, weren't the ones who demanded obedience. They were the ones who fostered trust." She met Sarah's eyes directly. "And I realized that I'd rather be trusted than feared. I'd rather build crews that work with me than crews that work for me. Because at the end of the day, we all go home safer when we function as teams rather than hierarchies." Sarah's expression finally shifted, showing something that might have been approval or might have been relief. "That's the answer I was hoping for." She signed the evaluation form with a flourish, then handed it to Laura. The assessment was thorough and honest, noting both Laura's significant progress and areas that still needed attention. But the final recommendation was clear. Captain Bennett has demonstrated genuine transformation in crew coordination and collaborative decision-making. Recommend continuation of active flight status without additional monitoring. Laura felt emotion well up, relief and gratitude, and something like redemption. 3 months ago, she'd been on the verge of losing everything, her career endangered by her own inability to see her failures. Now she had a second chance, earned through hard work, an honest self-examination, and the willingness to change. "Thank you," she said to Sarah, the words inadequate but sincere. "Don't thank me," Sarah replied. Sarah, thank Ryan for being willing to invest 3 months in your development. Thank yourself for actually doing the work. And thank whatever part of you was still willing to admit you could be wrong and needed to change. After Sarah left, Laura and Ryan stood in the quiet cockpit, surrounded by the instruments and systems that had been the stage for their transformation. "I couldn't have done this without you," Laura said quietly. "I know that's obvious, but I need to say it anyway. You gave me a chance I didn't deserve, invested time and energy in helping me become better, and never gave up even when I was frustrating and difficult." Ryan smiled faintly. "You were frustrating sometimes, but you were also committed to changing, willing to confront uncomfortable truths, and genuinely invested in becoming better. That made the work worthwhile." "What happens now?" Laura asked. "We've completed the required 20 flights. Do we just go back to random crew assignments?" Ryan considered the question. "That's up to you. We could request to continue flying together, build on what we've established. Or we could trust that you're capable of applying these skills with any first officer, not just me." Laura thought about it, feeling the weight of the choice. Part of her wanted the security of continuing with Ryan, the comfort of a crew dynamic she'd learned to trust. But another part understood that real growth meant proving she could collaborate effectively with anyone, not just one carefully selected partner. "I think I need to fly with other first officers," she said slowly. "I need to prove to myself that this change is real and sustainable, not dependent on one particular crew member. But I'd like to fly together sometimes, to maintain the partnership we've built." "That sounds reasonable," Ryan agreed. "And Laura, I'll be watching, not to catch you failing, but to see you succeed, to see you building the same kind of collaborative relationships with other first officers that we've developed." "What if I mess up?" Laura asked. "What if I fall back into old patterns with someone else?" "Then you'll catch yourself, apologize, and correct course," Ryan said simply. "That's what growth looks like. Not perfection, but the ability to recognize mistakes and address them before they become patterns." 6 months later, Laura stood in front of a classroom of new hire pilots, her role transformed from student to instructor. The company had asked her to develop and teach a crew resource management program, using her own experience as a case study in the importance of collaborative cockpit culture. "I want to tell you about the day I almost destroyed my career," she began, and then walked them through that morning on the tarmac, the hydraulic leak, the confrontation, and everything that had followed. She showed them the accident statistics, the case studies, the brutal reality of what happened when captains stopped listening. But more than that, she showed them what transformation looked like, how 3 months of intentional practice could rebuild patterns developed over 20 years, how humility could coexist with confidence, how collaboration could enhance rather than undermine authority, how admitting mistakes could actually strengthen rather than weaken a captain's command. Ryan sat in the back of the classroom during her first session, his presence both support and accountability. When Laura finished and opened the floor for questions, a young first officer raised her hand tentatively. "Captain Bennett, how do you handle situations where the captain doesn't want collaboration, where speaking up feels risky?" Laura recognized the question as the one she'd never wanted to hear, the one that revealed the reality of hierarchical cockpit cultures that still existed despite all the training and regulations. "You speak up anyway," she said firmly. "You speak up because safety demands it, because passengers deserve it, because it's your job as a professional pilot to voice concerns regardless of how they might be received." She paused, making eye contact with the young first officer. "And if you work with a captain who punishes you for speaking up, who creates a hostile environment, who makes you feel unsafe raising concerns, you document it and report it. Because that captain is a danger to everyone who flies with them, and they need intervention before their behavior causes a disaster." The young first officer nodded, seeming reassured. Laura continued through the rest of the session, sharing techniques and frameworks and hard-won wisdom. When it ended, several pilots lingered to ask additional questions, to share their own experiences, to thank her for her honesty. Ryan approached as the last students filed out, his expression thoughtful. "That was good," he said. "Better than good. You took your mistakes and turned them into teaching moments. You used your failure to help others avoid the same pitfalls." "It feels strange," Laura admitted, standing up there talking about how badly I messed up, how wrong I was, how close I came to disaster. But if it helps even one pilot recognize those patterns in themselves before they become dangerous, it's worth the discomfort. "It will help more than one," Ryan said confidently. "Trust me on that." They walked through the training facility together, their partnership now easy and comfortable, built on months of shared work and mutual respect. Outside, Denver's sky stretched blue and endless, aircraft tracing white contrails across the heavens. Laura thought about her father, the pilot who'd told her she could fly, who'd believed in her before she had 1,000 reasons to doubt herself. She wondered what he would think of the captain she'd become, not the defensive, rigid version from 6 months ago, but this newer iteration, humbled and collaborative and genuinely committed to building strong crews. She liked to think he'd be proud, not of her technical skills or her flight hours or her perfect safety record, but of her willingness to admit she'd been wrong, to do the hard work of changing, to transform failure into growth. "I have a flight this afternoon," Laura said, checking her watch. New first officer, someone I've never flown with before. "Nervous?" Ryan asked. "A little," Laura admitted, "but also excited. Excited to see if I can build the same kind of collaborative relationship with someone new. Excited to prove that what we developed together wasn't just specific to us." "You'll do fine," Ryan said confidently. "You've done the work. You've changed the patterns. Now you just need to trust that transformation and keep applying it consistently." Laura's new first officer was waiting at the gate, a young man barely 30, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he was either very prepared or very anxious. His name tag read Martinez J., and his handshake was firm but slightly too tight. "First Officer Martinez," Laura greeted him warmly. "Good to meet you. I'm Captain Bennett." "I know who you are, ma'am," Martinez said, his voice respectful but tense. I've heard about your training program, about crew resource management." Laura caught the implication. He'd heard about her past, about the incidents, about the transformation. She could have felt defensive, could have worried about her reputation preceding her. Instead, she chose transparency. "Then you've probably heard that I used to be difficult to work with," she said directly, "that I created hostile cockpit environments and didn't value first officer input. All of that is true. It's also in the past, and I've worked hard to change those patterns." Martinez's surprise was visible. Yes, ma'am. I had heard something like that." "Good," Laura said firmly. "Then you know that if you have concerns, if you identify issues, if you disagree with my decisions, I expect you to speak up. I need you to speak up. Your judgment and perspective make us both safer." She gestured toward the aircraft. "This is your cockpit as much as mine. We're a crew, not a hierarchy. I have final authority as captain, but that authority is most effective when it's informed by collaboration. So I need you to promise me something, First Officer Martinez. What's that, ma'am? Promise me you'll never stay silent about a safety concern because you're worried about my reaction, Laura said seriously. Promise me you'll trust that I actually mean it when I say your input is valued. Promise me you'll help make this crew as safe as possible by being honest and engaged. Martinez studied her for a moment, perhaps trying to reconcile the stories he'd heard with the captain standing in front of him. Finally, he nodded. I promise, Captain. Excellent, Laura said, smiling genuinely. Then let's go fly. They completed their pre-flight inspection together, Laura actively soliciting Martinez's observations, checking her own work against his findings. When they settled into the cockpit, she walked him through her decision-making process for the flight plan, explaining her reasoning and asking for his assessment. The weather looks good, Martinez offered. But there's a NOTAM about temporary restricted airspace along our usual route. I was thinking we might want to file an alternate that avoids it entirely. The old Laura would have bristled at the suggestion, would have defended her original flight plan as perfectly adequate. The new Laura actually considered the input. Show me what you're thinking, she said, and Martinez pulled up the navigation display, tracing an alternate route that added perhaps 5 minutes to their flight time, but avoided any potential delays from the restricted airspace. I like it, Laura decided. Let's file the alternate. Good catch. Martinez's relief was palpable, his shoulders relaxing fractionally. They flew the route together with increasing comfort, Martinez gradually realizing that Laura's collaborative approach wasn't performance, but genuine practice. Halfway through the flight, Laura noticed an unusual vibration in the controls, subtle but persistent. Her first thought was to dismiss it as normal turbulence, to avoid creating unnecessary concern. But she caught herself, remembering Ryan's hydraulic leak, remembering how easily small issues could become catastrophic if ignored. First Officer Martinez, I'm feeling a vibration in the controls. Are you noticing the same thing? Martinez focused his attention, his hands light on his yoke. Yes, ma'am. I feel it too. Irregular, maybe every 30 seconds or so. Let's run through the systems, make sure nothing's indicating abnormally, Laura said, and they worked through the instrument panel together, checking pressures and temperatures and electrical systems. Everything showed normal, but the vibration persisted. I'm not comfortable proceeding without identifying the source, Laura said. What's your assessment? Martinez hesitated, perhaps uncertain whether his perspective truly mattered. I think we should report it and request priority handling once we land so maintenance can investigate. It's probably nothing serious, but better to document and check than to ignore it. Agreed completely, Laura said, and made the report to air traffic control and company operations. When they landed 20 minutes later, a maintenance crew was waiting, and their inspection revealed a loose mounting bolt in the aileron control linkage, exactly the kind of minor mechanical issue that could have developed into something far more serious if left unchecked. In the post-flight debrief, Laura made sure Martinez understood the importance of what had happened. You noticed the vibration and took it seriously, she said. You recommended appropriate action despite it probably being nothing, and that decision potentially prevented a control system failure. That's excellent crew coordination, First Officer Martinez. That's exactly the kind of collaborative decision-making that keeps us safe. Martinez smiled, his earlier nervousness replaced with confidence. Thank you, Captain. This was a really good flight. Different than I expected. Different how? Laura asked, genuinely curious. I've flown with captains who wanted obedience, not input, Martinez said carefully. Captains who made it clear that first officers should stay quiet unless directly asked a question. This was the first time I felt like my judgment actually mattered, like my perspective was valued. Laura felt a complex mix of emotions, satisfaction that she'd created the environment she'd been working toward, but also sadness that Martinez's expectations had been set so low by other experiences. Your judgment always matters, she said firmly. Every first officer, every crew member brings valuable perspective, and any captain who doesn't recognize that is doing the job wrong. Word spread through the pilot community about Laura's transformation. Some remained skeptical, wondering if the change was genuine or just sophisticated performance. But others noticed the difference, saw the way her crews functioned, recognized the authenticity in her collaborative approach. 6 months became a year. Laura taught more training sessions, flew with dozens of different first officers, built collaborative relationships that made every flight safer and more effective. And she maintained her partnership with Ryan, flying together monthly, their crew coordination now so seamless it seemed almost telepathic. On a cold December morning, exactly 1 year after that confrontation on the tarmac, Laura found herself back at the same aircraft, preparing for the same route. But everything was different now. Ryan sat beside her in the first officer's seat, their pre-flight routines synchronized and comfortable. They'd flown together so many times now that communication required fewer words, each understanding the other's decision-making patterns and preferences. "You know what today is?" Ryan asked as they completed their checklist. "The anniversary of me being a complete disaster as a captain," Laura suggested with a slight smile. "The anniversary of you choosing to become better," Ryan corrected. "There's a difference." Laura thought about that morning a year ago, her arrogance, her defensiveness, her absolute certainty that she was right and Ryan was inadequate. She thought about the hydraulic leak she would have missed, the disaster she would have enabled through her own blindness. "I almost destroyed my career that day," she said quietly, "and I definitely would have destroyed lives eventually if I'd continued on that path. Thank you for not letting me." "You did the work, Laura," Ryan said. "I just provided the opportunity. The transformation was all you." They pushed back from the gate, the aircraft rolling backward into the familiar choreography of departure. Laura handled the controls with the same technical precision she'd always possessed, but now that precision was enhanced by genuine collaboration, by trust that went both ways, by the understanding that being a great captain meant building great crews. As they climbed into Denver's crystalline sky, Laura looked out at the mountains she'd flown over thousands of times. The view was the same, but she saw it differently now, not as a battlefield where she had to prove herself, but as a shared responsibility, a trust that passengers placed in crews who worked together to keep the skies safe. "You know what the best part of this past year has been?" Laura said once they reached cruising altitude. "What's that?" Ryan asked. "Coming home and actually feeling good about the work I'd done," Laura admitted. "Not just satisfied that I'd maintained my perfect record or proven my competence, but genuinely good about the crews I'd built, the first officers I'd empowered, the collaborative culture I'd helped create." She glanced at Ryan, this quiet first officer who'd turned out to be so much more. Partner, teacher, friend. "I used to think respect came from being feared. Now I know it comes from being trusted, and trust has to be earned through action, not demanded through authority." "That's wisdom," Ryan observed. "Hard-won wisdom, but wisdom nonetheless." They flew in comfortable silence for a while, the aircraft steady and true, their instruments showing all systems normal. Behind them, passengers read books and watched movies and slept, trusting that the crew in the cockpit would get them home safely. And Laura knew, with certainty born from a year of consistent practice and genuine transformation, that she and Ryan would honor that trust. Not through technical skill alone, but through collaboration, communication, and the kind of crew coordination that turned competent pilots into exceptional teams. The sun set as they approached their destination, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Laura executed the approach with Ryan's assistance, their call-out synchronized, their cross-checking automatic, their partnership evident in every action. The landing was smooth, the touchdown gentle. As they taxied to the gate, Laura felt the satisfaction of another safe flight, another successful crew coordination, another proof that transformation was possible when people chose growth over pride. In the terminal, as they completed their post-flight paperwork, a young first officer approached hesitantly. "Captain Bennett, I'm scheduled for your CRM training session next week. I just wanted to say, well, I've heard really good things about your program, about your teaching, about how you've helped change cockpit culture for the better." Laura smiled, remembering the captain she'd been a year ago, the one who would have seen this as validation of her authority rather than recognition of collaborative growth. "I'm looking forward to working with you," she said warmly, "and thank you for signing up. The work we do in that training, learning to build effective crews, to communicate honestly, to value every team member's perspective, it's the most important work in aviation. Because technical skills keep us flying, but collaboration keeps us safe." The young first officer nodded, encouraged, and walked away to prepare for her own flight. Ryan watched the exchange with quiet approval. "You've come a long way, Captain Bennett." "We've come a long way," Laura corrected, "because I couldn't have done this alone. And that's maybe the most important lesson I've learned, that none of us can do this alone. We're only as good as the crews we build, the partnerships we foster, the trust we earn." They walked through the terminal together one last time, two pilots who'd transformed conflict into collaboration, who'd turned a moment of crisis into an opportunity for genuine growth. Outside, aircraft continued their eternal dance of departure and arrival, each one carrying crews who held lives in their hands, who bore the sacred responsibility of safe flight. And Laura knew that somewhere in those cockpits, captains and first officers were working together, some collaboratively, some hierarchically, some still learning the difference. She hoped her story, her transformation, her willingness to share her failures and growth would help tip the balance toward collaboration. Because in the end, that was what kept the skies safe. Not perfect pilots, but partnered crews. Not flawless captains, but collaborative teams. Not authority without accountability, but leadership built on trust, respect, and the genuine belief that everyone's perspective mattered. Laura had learned that lesson the hard way, through confrontation and crisis and the patient guidance of a first officer who'd believed she could change. Now she spent her days teaching that lesson to others, hoping they could learn it without having to first nearly destroy everything they'd built. The sky stretched endless above Denver, blue and beautiful and full of promise. Laura looked up at it, feeling gratitude for second chances, for partners willing to invest in transformation, for the opportunity to become better than her worst moments. And then she went home, to rest and prepare and ready herself for the next flight, the next crew, the next opportunity to prove that change was possible, that growth was real, and that the best captains were the ones who never stopped learning how to build better teams. The work would never be finished. There would always be new challenges, new first officers, new situations that tested her commitment to collaboration. But Laura was ready for that work now, equipped with humility and honesty and the understanding that being a great captain meant being a great partner first. The sky was waiting, and Laura Bennett, captain and collaborator, was ready to fly.